Hey there, everybody. It's PT Pop here with all four lobes of my brain securely bound behind my back. And welcome to another episode of PT Pop, a mind revolution, where I lead you out of the rabbit hole, one grain of truth at a time. And on tonight's show, I've got a great guy, Mike Williams, author of Sage of Quay Radio, Beatles conspiracy theorist, world-renowned Beatles conspiracy theorist. And tonight we're going to talk about Mike's background as a hypnotherapist and how hypnotism may in fact be used in the production of popular music that we all listen to every day. Thanks for being on tonight, Mike. How's it going?
It's going very well, Peter, and thank you so much for inviting me back to your show.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for being here. And I know this is kind of a deep topic, but I think you'd be the perfect person to talk to about this. How did you get your start as a hypnotherapist?
Going back to 2009, I was looking for some good books on near-death experience because I was always fascinated by it. And in my search for a good book, I stumbled upon another book that had to do with spiritual regression, hypnotic regression, and past lives and life between lives. And that book was from the Michael Newton Institute. And the title of the book was Memories of the Afterlife.
Mm-hmm.
And so I read the write-up on Amazon, and it interests me. So I decided, let's give it a shot. So I didn't know anything about Michael Newton. I, of course, knew about reincarnation, but I didn't know much about past life regression, experiencing past lives through hypnosis. I mean, I heard of it, but I didn't have any level of expertise in it. So I bought the book and I read it. I think it's something like 32 case studies coming out of the Newton Institute. And when I got done reading the book, I was completely fascinated by it. And I thought to myself, I want to see if I can get myself one of these sessions. So I wound up connecting with a practitioner in Wilmington, North Carolina, which is about 2 hours from where I live. I live in the Raleigh area in North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
And I had my sessions in the fall of 2009. I had a past life regression, and I had the next day a life between lives. So the difference is a past life regression is when you go into deep trance and you go back and you experience one of your past lives. Mm-hmm. A life between lives is that period of time in between your physical incarnation. So it's the time that you spend in the spirit world. So to make a long story short, I had two great sessions. I had the past life on a Thursday, and I had the life between lives, also referred to as an LBL, on Friday. So when I drove home after the Friday session, I was thinking this was an amazing experience. And a few weeks after that, I decided that I would like to train in this type of work. And so what I did was I contacted my practitioner. Her name is Brenda. And when I went to see Brenda for my sessions, I didn't know who she was. She was just a practitioner that was, she was a referral on the Newton Institute's website. And I asked her, I said, hey, do you know of any good schools where I can train to become a hypnotherapist? And she says, as a matter of fact, I do. She teaches, she taught. So I took her course. And I took her course in the early part of 2010. And it was a very exciting time. It was just something that I really, really wanted to train for. I thought my experience was great. I knew that the work would be great. And so by June of 2010, I was completely certified, not only in clinical hypnosis, but also in past life regression. And that's when I started my practice in mid 2010. And I was in private practice for 12 years. I had a very busy practice. And I did hundreds upon hundreds and hundreds of sessions, both spiritual sessions, which would be past lives and between lives, and also clinical hypnosis, helping people to quit smoking, vaping, drinking, weight,
Sure.
all that stuff. So uh, I was board certified by the International Association of Counselors and Therapists. And that's what I did for 12 years after my stint in the corporate world. So I spent 32 years in the corporate world, Pete, and
Wow.
12 years of private practice as a hypnotherapist. 4 of those years overlapped because what I was doing was I was working to bridge to a new career once I retired and left the corporate world. So
Hmm.
yeah, and I retired from my practice in September of 2022. I
Okay.
felt 12 years was long enough. I was 63 at the time, and my daughter was pregnant with our first grandchild, and my wife and I wanted to spend more time with the kids
Yeah.
and to do other things, quite frankly, other than work.
So you get into hypnotherapy. So at what point did you connect the dots between hypnotherapy, pop culture, and music, and what music may be doing to the masses that the masses are unaware of?
Well, I connected the dots early on, not so much with the music industry, but um, as far as mainstream news was
Yes.
concerned.
Yeah.
So once I became trained in hypnosis, and I was also a a instructor. I was a hypnosis instructor. I was with the International Association of Counselors and Therapists. That's my teaching was sanctioned by them, and I worked actually with the person I went to go see for my first sessions, Brenda. We became very good friends and colleagues, and we worked together for almost a decade.
Hmm.
So during that period of time, early on, I should say, but as time progressed, I was able to apply my knowledge of hypnosis and techniques to other areas in our reality. But the news, the mainstream news media was it was very, very obvious.
What did you see in the mainstream media that stuck out to you?
Repetition. So the key to hypnosis, the key to getting somebody to change their behavior. So hypnosis is really about behavior modification. So if we approach it from that perspective,
Hmm.
and so when you watch the news, you're going to see a lot of repetition. And the inner mind or the subconscious mind loves imagery. This
Hmm.
is
Oh yeah.
very, very important.
Yeah.
So let's just, as an example, let's pick on a cable network like Fox News. So the first thing they're going to do is they're going to present some kind of conflict, some kind of tragedy, some kind of shooting, something that's disruptive, something that is dysfunctional, something that is worrisome to most people.
Sure.
So they set the table that way. And then what they'll do is they will have looped video that they will show over and
Yeah.
over and over
Yeah.
again. And
Yeah.
a lot of people will ask, gee, don't they have any more video than that? Why do they keep
Yeah.
showing that loop? Well, the reason why they're showing that loop is because they're trying to pull you in and nail it into your inner mind. Now, if you think in terms of your mind having a hard drive, it's a very good analogy. So these files get written to the hard drive. So these loops, because
Hmm.
the inner mind loves imagery, it's taking in this video. It's taking in the whatever it is that they're showing you. They show it repeatedly over and over and over again. But not only do they do that, but then they have the quote reporter or the anchor person talking, and what they're giving you is hypnotic suggestions,
Yes.
worry, concern,
Yes.
tragedy, be fearful,
And they
and
do it with tone of voice.
tone of voice.
And the editing of the loop you're talking about, I've noticed this in films. I learned this on my own. It's very quick edits.
Yes.
It's like no more than 3 seconds of the guy laying bleeding on the ground. Then you cut to the car. Then you cut to the building he crashed in. Then back to the guy bleeding on the ground, and it's very fast. It's staccato. Is that
Yes.
right? Am I onto something there?
Yes. No, that's
Yeah,
exactly right.
yeah,
And the other trick that they use is you'll see spinning logos. So Fox
yeah.
News will have this. Now, this is eye fixation. So when people tend to watch the logo going around, what this does is
Yes,
this lulls you into a trance. So
yes.
there's four basic trance states: beta, which is your waking state; alpha, which is below beta. This is a light trance state. This is where you're at when you're watching TV, when you're
Hmm.
watching a movie. Below that is theta. Theta would be when you go into hypnosis, deep
Yeah.
meditation, and then delta. Delta is sleep. So beta,
Okay.
alpha, theta, delta. So when you're watching television, you're watching Fox News, and you see that spinning logo, and you're watching the loops, and the reporter or the anchor person is giving you these hypnotic suggestions, you're being lulled into a trance state, and now you're taking this all and you're in hypnosis. The other
Yes.
thing that they do, Peter, is at the very bottom, they will have a ticker tape, which is showing stock prices, right?
Or news, current
Or
news,
news, right?
which all started on 9/11. That
And
that
that
all
has
started.
nothing to do with stock prices or the news. It's the same thing as the spinning logo. You're watching it go across the screen, and you keep watching it,
Wow.
and you're watching. It's like when you go to bed at night and you read a book. A lot of people will say, I want to read a book at night to relax, but I can't get past a page or two before I feel sleepy.
Hmm.
So this is the same thing that's going on. Now, the other thing that they do is they have the use of colors. So blue and red are very
Hmm.
popular.
Yep.
So aside from being Masonic colors, the Blue Lodge and the Red Lodge, blue, from the mind's perspective, is received as very calming, the voice of reason. Don't worry,
Yes.
everything's under control.
Yeah.
So a lot
Yeah.
of times you will see the reporter or the anchor person or somebody that they're interviewing will be wearing a blue shirt,
Or there were the background. They're bathed in blue
backgrounds,
light in the background. Yeah.
exactly, and or they'll wear a blue tie. So when they
Yeah.
bring somebody on, they have a blue tie, a blue jacket on. They're talking to them. They're presenting this person as the voice of reason. This is the person that's going to have a calming effect. Everything's under control. No need to worry.
Yeah.
Then they'll have people come on that will be dressed. A woman reporter or the anchor person might have a red dress on, or the man will have a red tie on. Red is interpreted by the mind as be alert,
Hmm.
something is concerning. It means stop,
It's passionate. It's
worry.
anger. Yeah.
Okay, so it means all those things. That's how the
Yeah.
mind interprets the two colors. So think of blue and red as on two opposite sides of the spectrum when it comes to how the mind interprets those colors. So the point I'm trying to make is there is a multifaceted approach to how cable news and even network news goes about setting the hypnosis session up for the person that's watching their television, because at the end of the day, that's exactly what it is, Pete. You're sitting down for a hypnosis session.
Let me ask you something really quick about the news.
Yeah.
Local and national, they do death, murder, rape for 25 minutes. Then the very last story is a little puppy dog was found today in a bushel of hay and it was rescued. And why do they, is there any science to where they end it with the soft puppy dog story? Or is that just a production thing?
I think it's probably a production thing, and also so that they can say that they balance the scales between all the heavy, dark stuff. And look, we gave you a little happy
Yeah, yeah.
piece of footage here in a little segment. But the vast majority of what we watch, especially at the national level and even at the local level, has to do with stuff that's disruptive to our lives, things that we would be fearful of, uh, shootings, tragedy, all kinds of stuff.
Exactly.
Every time a hurricane comes, what do they say? It could be the worst hurricane in 100 years. Every hurricane has that tagline. That's to get people all lathered up, get them concerned,
Hmm.
getting them to run around like a bunch of chickens without their heads, heading out to the supermarket, buying everything they could possibly get their
Yes.
hands
Yeah.
on,
Yeah.
right? And then go home and wait for the storm. And in most cases, that doesn't happen, right? They're almost never, they're almost always never the hurricane of the century.
Sure.
Um, so the point I'm trying to make is that uh, it's all or mostly all doom and gloom.
Mhm.
And the reason why they do this is because that's exactly where they want people. They don't want people to be upbeat because an upbeat person will be productive. They want you unproductive. They want you to be concerned. They want you to be stressed. That's
Yeah.
why they're always giving you, this, aside from the fact, that they gaslight people. Everybody knows, as an example, that the job market, the economy is terrible.
Oh,
But
yeah.
then they will get on TV and tell you that it's great.
Oh,
Inflation's not
yeah.
that bad. Employment numbers are up. This is another technique. It's another mind control technique to to make you feel like there's something wrong with you.
Yeah.
I mean, this person on the television is telling me the economy's good, inflation's not bad, everything's great, yet my life doesn't seem to be clicking along very well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is what is referred to as gaslighting. So to answer your question, what really got me looking first, or the first thing I looked at was the news and how it was being presented. And then, as time went on, I was looking at other areas, and ultimately I started taking a look at how it was presented in music. Music gets a little trickier because and I know we'll talk about this, because it's music, and it's very difficult to convince people that music is being used as a way to create behavior modification, to
Hmm.
program people
Oh,
to
sure.
believe certain things, to behave certain ways. So that's a more difficult thing to get through. I think it's easier for people to see how the news is manipulating people's minds. It's a little more difficult to convince them that their popular music or their bands are doing that.
Sure. And one thing I forgot to mention at the beginning was we're both Beatle fans, and when
Yeah.
I was a kid, the Beatles consumed my life. I mean, it was almost instantaneous. From the moment I heard "I Want to Hold Your Hand" and "She Loves You," I was obsessed, and I stayed that way for a good 20 years, where I would actually get into fights with people, not physical fights, but verbal altercations, defending my band, and just buying anything I could related to the Beatles, and it was all I thought about night and day. And then as I woke up from this dream world, Beatle dream world, I said, what was that all about? Why was I so obsessed with this music? And that's why I want to talk with you, because I want to see, is there some type of hypnotic messages in these music? Is there a frequency that they're broadcasting in the recording studio that they mix into the music that puts our brains into some type of vortex, or a retractor beam that locks us in? And that's where I am. I just wonder why all music is like this. It affects me. Most music used to affect me a great deal. Not anymore though. It has the opposite effect on me now. I'm irritated with music now as I'm older, which is strange.
It's the first thing we have to, I think, visit, um, is to go back to what Tavistock is very good at. So Tavistock, for those that don't know, from a deep state perspective, Tavistock is the propaganda and social engineering headquarters of the New World Order, the deep state, however, or whatever label you want to apply to the shadow government. And two things that they're very good at is creating cults and getting people to think in a childlike manner,
Hmm.
to keep adults from thinking, critically thinking like adults. In other words, having adult reasoning, adult logic. So what they want to do is they want to push that reasoning and logic down to a child's level. And I'm not, folks, I'm not trying to be funny here or facetious. This is exactly what they
Sure.
do. Because when that happens, that's when adults have these emotional responses to things. So they have these knee-jerk reactions to defend their belief system, and their belief system is embedded in the cult or whatever it is that you're invested in. So using the Beatles as an example, the Beatles are a cult. I call it Beatleism.
Mm-hmm.
The fan base is legion. They are extremely loyal, extremely dedicated.
Oh
They
yeah.
will defend the band, to the end of days.
Oh yes.
And I
Yeah.
and I was like that too, Peter. I
Oh
was
I
the
yeah.
same as you.
Yeah, I was. Yeah.
These arguments that I would get into about how great the Beatles music was and no band was better than them and all that
Yeah.
stuff.
And I've run into that on my YouTube channel,
Oh yeah,
with people just going off on me like, who is this guy? What do you know? And you know, I was like that once. I was just
yes,
like, oh God, but yeah.
yeah. But that's the cult aspect of it, Peter. So that put that in one little box. That's the cult piece of it, and then you have the reducing the thinking down to that of a child or an
Hmm.
adolescent. So this is why you and I get the responses that we do when we present our videos on the Beatles and we question the official narrative. What's happening is the child programming is coming out in these people, and they're blowing a fuse. They're
Hmm.
becoming irate. I mean, you have to see some of the comments that I get. I mean, they don't make it onto the video because you block these
Yeah.
people, but they could be belligerent,
Oh yeah.
nasty, and it's why. It's because you're questioning their belief system.
Yeah. The foundation from which they were hypnotized. I think we were all hypnotized,
Yep.
and somehow we were. You feel threatened subconsciously. You feel threatened. The foundation of your existence. My God, threaten the Beatles or whoever your band is. I've seen, guys in high school, we'd get in these verbal screaming matches about Def
Yes.
Leppard versus the Beatles or, whoever the band was
Oh,
at the
the
time.
Stones and the Beatles were
Oh,
were the
yeah.
big
Yeah.
one when I was growing up, and
Oh, yeah.
it almost wind up in a fist fight.
Yeah. Crazy stuff. Yeah.
So you have to start from that perspective, and the reason why I want to start there is because you have to understand that everything that goes on um, in the entertainment and the music business, that is not happenstance. It's not just rolling along organically and naturally, and it's not coincidence that certain things are happening.
Hmm.
It's all very, very planned out by, and for the sake of simplicity, I'll say the deep state and the various functions within the deep state, with Tavistock, like I said, being the center, the focal point for brainwashing and social engineering.
Sure.
So they're going to pull out every rabbit they can out of the hat, and one of those rabbits is frequency and vibration, sound. So music is sound. I mean, it's frequency, it's vibration,
Sure.
and it's been long known for a very long time by those that study psychology and psychiatry that music has a tremendous impact on shaping people's emotions and their feelings, and also can alter their behavior, their ways of thinking. Um, Pete and I, folks, have a document that goes back to 1965. It has to do with the Beatles, hypnosis, and communism. And it was written back in 1965. It's a 20-page document. Maybe what I'll do, Peter, I'll send you the link so people can download it and take a look for themselves.
Okay. Yeah. I've
But
got it here too.
yeah, but in that document, it clearly talks about how how music can be used to put people in a hypnotic state.
Sure.
And it talks about how this begins at very early ages when we're kids.
Oh, yeah.
certain songs. And of course, the 20-page article, it's actually a small, I guess 20 pages would be a small pamphlet or whatever, makes its way into the Beatles and the Beatles sound and all of that. And that there is a science behind popular music to transform the way people think and the way they react and the way they behave. So hypnosis is behavior modification, and music is one of the tools in the toolbox to create behavior modification.
Yeah, and the article says that the Beatles are basically a communist plot to undermine the youth and the family structure in America at the time, um, through the use of these hypnotic beats and frequencies and harmonies. And the article was kind of dissed because of the Cold War between the two countries, communist Russia and America. And I found it kind of fascinating because as you read it, you're like, now you understand it. But back then, I can only imagine this guy probably got flack like crazy for being a lunatic, because of McCarthyism and everything else that was going on at the time.
Yeah, so I know we don't want to major on this, but to
Yeah.
explain that, the communists, when they talk about a communist plot, what they're really talking about is Marxism. And more specifically, we're talking about cultural Marxism. So, cultural Marxism is the implementation of Marxism or communism in a subversive way by subverting from within. So, essentially, bringing the current system down by infiltrating the government organizations
Yep.
and so on. The other form of communism, which some might refer to as Lenin communism, going back to the Bolshevik Revolution in the early 1900s, and Russia, was their tactic was violence.
Yes.
But what happened in the 1920s and 30s, that was the formation of the Frankfurt School. The Frankfurt School is out of Frankfurt, Germany, and it was a congregation of Marxist intellectuals. And so they went to their fellow Marxists and communists and said, look, this hitting people in the head with a hammer, that's not going to work. Okay, so this violence is just going to turn, it's going to turn people off. And so we're not going to accomplish our goals. So the goal of the Frankfurt School was to have a subdued approach to implementing Marxism. And one of their leading intellectuals there was a guy by the name of Max Horkheimer. And Max had said that they will implement Marxism in a very methodical, incremental way, and in such a way that the population, the masses, won't even know. So that's why when they talk about the Beatles, that article that from 1965 that you and I were just talking about, when they talk about the Beatles and communism, they're really talking about the Beatles and the implementation of cultural Marxism, because the Beatles were one of those tools to bring about the change in a very subtle way. When I say subtle, I mean without the violence, without revolution. It's a quiet revolution. It's a revolution that's taking place, that took place very, very methodically. So, but the article, like you said, Peter, I'm sure back in the day, that guy probably got clobbered because,
Oh, sure.
they would have thought he was some kind of fringe lunatic. But now, having the hindsight of 60 years later and looking back 60 years, we could see that the people involved in that article and that analysis, they had a pretty good grasp on what was coming.
So what connection do you see or do you make between your education and your experience as a hypnotherapist and what you hear and see in music?
Well, what we're seeing in music is it's repetition, number one. So as I mentioned, repetition is very important to be able to program the mind. Human beings are programmable. I don't like saying that, but as I was a master hypnotherapist, and as I mentioned, an instructor as well. And when I got into hypnosis, I realized that we are programmable. As an example, let me just give you, an example here. So people would come to see me, and they were smokers, and they would say, "Mike, I've tried everything. I've tried everything to stop smoking, and I just can't quit. Peter, I got, I would say 98% of my clients who smoked to stop smoking after 2 sessions within a week. So I would schedule two
Wow.
sessions within 7 days. And after the second session, they didn't smoke anymore.
Wow.
I had the same success with people that had problems with drinking, in particular binge drinking.
Mhm.
Hypnosis is less effective if it's dependency or alcoholism. But if you're a binge drinker, in other words, you go out for the weekend and
Sure.
then you black out, but you don't drink for 2 or 3 months after that. So you're doing this binge stuff. I had a very high success rate to get people to stop binge drinking,
Wow.
to get people to stop vaping, for people to lose weight, release weight. Very high success. So what does that tell you? It tells you that we're programmable. So how does that work? It works because think in terms of there's a hard drive in your mind,
Mm-hmm.
and that hard drive has files. And for the smoker, there's a file written to the hard drive. It began when they first started smoking. And every time they smoked, many times smoking is done because people want to relax. So when they want to relax or take a break, smoking is what they do. The
Okay.
more they did it, the bigger the file became. The bigger the file became, it now dictated their behavior.
Okay.
And apply that to just about anything. So if somebody has a lack of confidence, it's the same thing. There was a moment in time where something happened where their confidence was questioned, or they felt that, or they were questioning their confidence, something where they felt like maybe they fell on their face. That
Mm-hmm.
file got written to the hard drive. And now going forward, anytime they were engaging in a situation or interacting in a situation where confidence was required and they were doubting themselves about whether they had the level of confidence and ability to get something done, that file was strengthened. And it gets to the point where the person later on in their life says, I don't have any confidence. I completely lack confidence.
Sure.
Right. So it's the same thing when we talk about music. So when we experience music, especially music that we like, it writes a file to that hard drive. And so we have an appreciation for that particular band or that particular genre of music. And so we continue to buy records or CDs or stream or whatever, however you listen, and we're listening and listening and listening. And as you do that, what's happening is that file that got dropped early on in your life is now being fed and enriched with continued inputs and reinforcement of that particular style of music, something that you enjoy.
Okay.
And so what happens now is you're completely bought in. So in the case of myself, I go back to the Beatles. So, Beatles music when I was a kid, you've heard me tell this story 100 times, but I was 9 years old when I was begging my father to take me to go see Yellow Submarine in 1968. At 9 years old, I was already like this little Beatle freak.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And so I love the Beatles. And so anytime a Beatles song came on, it reinforced my desire to love the Beatles, want to be like the Beatles, pick up and play guitar like the Beatles, on and on and on. So that's how it works. That's how it works with just about everything in our life. The more we engage something, the more it feeds and reinforces those files.
Sure.
And then, like I said, it defines our behavior. And in some cases, it will define who we are.
Oh, yeah.
So that's how I started taking a look at music as well. And I mentioned to you before we got started with the show, uh, music is frequency, it's vibration. And the social scientists have known for a very, very long time that frequency and vibration has an effect on human beings because we are vibrational, frequency-based
Sure.
beings.
Even the earth has a frequency.
That's right, the Schumann resonance. And
Mm-hmm.
so there are frequencies that can be disruptive to us, and then there are frequencies that will make us feel good. So it goes both ways. And some people may know who are watching this, but there was a man, he's passed away now. His name is Alan Watt. And Alan, in an interview that I actually included in one of my big presentations, I think it was the addendum going back a couple of years ago. And he talked about, going back to the Beatles, how George Martin wasn't just a producer, but George Martin was skilled in acoustics and sound and
Mm-hmm.
how it affected the listener. So in a way, when you think about it in those terms, aside from being a producer, George Martin was a social scientist,
Mm-hmm.
a social engineer. So from the perspective of the Beatles, you had frequencies in the songs, the way the songs were written, the way the lyrics were presented. They would create these feelings within us. I know for me, Pete, whenever I listened to Sgt. Pepper or the Magical Mystery Tour album, because of the psychedelic um, genre,
Sure.
the way the music was put together, the way the lyrics were put together, I sensed color. I always said that the Beatles Sgt. Pepper album and Magical Mystery Tour always brought colors to my mind.
Sure.
And now, not everybody's going to experience that, but I did. So, and I know other people who have. In fact, Kat from the Supernatural Beatles, she and I did an
Sure.
interview, and she mentioned that the music had the same effect.
It's funny you
Her.
mentioned Sergeant Pepper's because when I first heard it, I was 9 years old. This is 1974,
Yeah,
and I felt it was a dark album. I don't know if you not color. I didn't see colors, but as a child hearing it, I was like, it was very dark and morbid, and weird, cryptic type of music. I've never liked the
really.
album,
Okay.
and it had a weird, I don't know
Had
what you
it.
call evil feeling to it, or I wouldn't call it evil when I was 9, but now as I look back as a 9-year-old, it was like my least favorite Beatle record.
That's interesting. So it had a different effect on you than it did
Yeah.
for me. Now, it's funny you say that, and I can kind of relate those types of feelings to the White Album. So when I
Mm,
listen to the White Album, there's a sense of it's not colorful. It's kind of drab. And I'm not going to say that there aren't good songs on the White Album. It's just that there's a different vibe, a different feeling, a different sense that I get from listening to the White Album than I did when I listened to Pepper or to Magical Mystery Tour.
Now, do you think this is kind of a little off topic, but the album covers, as for those of you that didn't grow up with albums, we'd all sit and stare at the album while we
Yeah,
listened to the records.
yeah,
So as you stare at Sergeant Pepper's, like this blood red cover with these psychedelic covers or colors of their uniforms, their marching band uniforms. So do you think the colors
oh
from
yeah,
that album stimulated colors in your brain, and the White Album with no color made you feel it was drab? Because I think that the album designs have a definite effect, or used to in the old days,
yeah,
on every one of us that listen to music.
yeah. I mean, to this day, I can still look at the Sergeant Pepper album, Pete, and I like looking at it as much as I know about
Yeah.
the Beatles and what they were all about. And
Yeah.
when I
Yeah.
look at that album cover, it's it's very appealing. And yeah, and the White Album was just this blank white album. We call it the White Album, but actually the Beatles didn't title the album the White Album. It was just called the
Yeah.
Beatles. So yeah, so the colors, um, the the type of music, how the music is written, the lyrics, the frequency of the music, this all comes into play. And like I mentioned, the social scientists, the social engineers out of Tavistock, they know how all of this works. And again, it's repetition, repeating over and over and over again. Some people will say to me, "Well, are you saying every band that was let's just pick the classic rock era
Sure.
was in on the on the game?" And I said, "No, I'm not saying that at all. What happens is they create a template. So the template would be the Beatles or the Rolling Stones. We'll
Okay.
just use them as an example. And so when other bands come into play and they get signed by the record labels, what do? Many of them emulate the the Beatles or the Rolling Stones. They emulate that sound. They emulate that approach to songwriting, maybe even
Hmm.
how the lyrics are written and stuff like that. So so that's the repetition part. Bands that are not even in on on The Secret, although many are, especially the really the bands that have hit certain pinnacles or heights that other bands couldn't even touch. Uh, that's the repetition part because they're emulating,
Okay.
you know, and so they don't have to be in on The Secret.
Well,
They're
the
just
repetition part would be the rhythms. The rhythms and the music are similar.
right.
The structures of the songs are
Structures of the
similar.
songs. Yep,
Um,
yep,
the beat, the tempo. It's Stones, Who, Beatles, Kinks.
right,
It's all very similar
right.
in construction. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, yes, that's what I'm saying. And so, we can go from the very popular bands even down to the one-hit wonders,
Hmm.
right? Some of the one-hit wonders were, obviously they were they were extremely influenced by the bigger bands like the Stones, the Who, the Kinks, and so on. So, yeah, so the music business is a big tool in the toolbox of the social scientists, of the controllers of Tavistock. So it's used to manipulate. It's used to change behavior. It's used to change morals, ethics, lifestyles. Um, it's the whole pop culture bit, where they're leading you and pushing you in a certain direction. And as we know, what they also do from a mind control um, perspective is they introduce different genres of music because they're trying to reach different pieces of the population or different demographics. When we go back to, as an example, um, uh, punk music in the 1970s, think about the word punk. Punk means, if you look it up in a dictionary, low life. Punk music, low life music.
Hmm.
So what are they doing with that? Well, the punk scene was, it was very dysfunctional. Um, they were outliers from a
Hmm.
societal perspective. So they're conditioning a group of people, the young people, to connect with that, to be outliers, to be dysfunctional, to be anti this, anti that, and to push back on the existing structures in society and the culture, right? And that's how they force change. This is cultural Marxism, by the way. This is right out of their
Sure.
handbook.
Sure.
But I'm just picking on punk as an example. But we can look at metal. We can look at
Oh,
grunge
sure.
music, techno. Techno with the beat. The vibrations from the
It's
beat
very
from techno
hypnotic,
music, very
or
hypnotic.
trance music as well.
Yeah, rap.
Now, if you had mentioned different styles of music. Now, I noticed when I was a kid, I was always trying to convince my mom that the Beatles were what she should listen to. and she grew up listening to Sinatra and all the big band stuff. She thought the Beatles were absolute crap until she heard the song "Your Mother Should Know,"
Yeah.
which is a schleppy,
Yeah.
you know. And my mother heard that. She's like, "Oh my God, that's wonderful." And I always wondered if they incorporated that kind of music into the repertoire to pull in the World War II era people who were anti-Beatles to try to soften them up. You got McCartney singing the ballads. You got Lennon appealing to the kids that are angry. George is the spiritual one. Ringo's the goofy guy at the drums. It seemed like each person was like Earth, Wind, and Fire. They were each a different element to appeal to a large audience. And I think that's brilliant marketing. It can't, there's no way that can't be structured. They make it sound like it just happened. But I think they had Paul in there to bring in people like my mom or my dad they listened to the crooners. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I
When
mean,
I'm
I could be
64.
completely wrong. Yeah, that was another one she liked.
Yeah.
It was another one she just loved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It could very well be, Pete, that they slipped numbers in there to appeal to a portion or a segment of the population that they weren't overly focused on. But hey, look, if we could pull a couple of people in that aren't there already,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, all the better. So, I would say that that's very possible that that's the reason why some of those songs were put together. I mean, somebody might argue, well, Paul or Billy liked to write those songs. Yeah, but he also wrote Helter Skelter.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. So,
Which is allegedly about a slide,
yeah,
a children's ride in the park or something.
yeah,
What I know about production, music production, if you listen to the early Beatles stuff, the She Loves You era, you've got a lot of frequencies in that music.
yeah.
You've got the constant crash cymbal, the ride cymbal Ringo, or the hi-hat. You've got that constant, and when I hear that now, it drives my brain crazy. I can't listen to it anymore. When I was a kid, it creates a hysteria in the brain. The high range of the cymbals, the driving beat. You don't really hear the bass too much in the old recordings. And I noticed that some of their more popular songs are Paul singing the higher range, which seems to be extremely popular. It seems like most pop songs, you've got a guy singing almost in a falsetto voice. And I've always wondered if that was strategic too, because the frequency must engage the brain more than somebody like myself or James Taylor that sings like a baritone, lower range. It doesn't have the sexy appeal to the brain. Have you ever looked into anything like that? The
Well,
frequencies.
what I can do is for this show, I printed out this article. It's from October of 2012.
Okay.
It's titled "The Power of Music: Mind Control by Rhythmic Sound."
Oh, okay.
Okay, so let me just, I highlighted some areas. I think that this will answer your question, Peter. So there was a psychologist who performed some research. Her name was Annette Shermer, and she published her findings at the Society of Neuroscience at a meeting in New Orleans. And she said that rhythmic sound not only coordinates the behavior of people in a group, it also coordinates their thinking. The mental processes of individuals in the group become synchronized. So when you think about like Beatlemania,
Mm.
if we apply Beatlemania to what I just read here, many Beatle fans, when they became Beatle fans, their mental processes, the individuals in the group became synchronized. They
Yeah.
became, they're part of the cult now. This finding extends the well-known power of music to tap into brain circuits controlling emotion and movement, to actually control the brain circuitry of sensory perception. This discovery helps explain how drums unite tribes in ceremony. So think
Wow.
about that.
Yeah.
Why armies march to bugle and drum into battle. Why worship and ceremonies are infused by song. Why speech is rhythmic. So think in terms of rap music as an example. Punctuated by rhythms of emphasis on particular syllables and words, and perhaps why we dance. So think in terms of when we think about music, it's called the hook,
Mm-hmm.
right? Something that people will latch onto And even if they don't know the words to, the verses of the song, they will know the hook, they will know the chorus, and they will
Yeah.
sing that.
Yeah.
Right. So it goes on to say that the brain's decision making was accelerated by the external auditory rhythm and heightened at precise points in synchrony with the beat. So what they're saying there is that the brain was very focused on the beat. So when the people that were in the subjects in the research, when they were listening to music, when the beat was present, that's when they had heightened sensory perception. So whatever was going on at that time, that's what they focused on when that beat hit that point. So I thought this was a very interesting article, and it explains a lot in a very, it's only 4 pages, as to how music can program people and how it can get them to behave, take individuals essentially and create a hive mind mentality so that
Sure.
they all behave in a certain way, in a like manner way. Um, we can even see that with Beatlemania, right? I mean,
Oh yeah.
with the screaming girls.
Yeah.
Why would the reaction be to scream at the top of your lungs, and in some
Yeah.
cases they lost control of their bodily functions.
Oh yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean,
They
this is
wet
not
themselves.
right. Yeah, this is true. How did it get to that point where to such uh, you got into such a frenzy that you're behaving and reacting this way? Was it because of the 4 guys that were dressed in suits and with mop tops? It had to do with the music.
It's bizarre to see. And could it be just like a flock of birds? You see one bird go in one direction, they all go in that direction. So if you see one girl screaming, they all think I'm supposed to do that, or was there something in the music that was driving them insane at that moment?
Well, at Taylor Swift concerts, there have been reports of people who attended the concert to say that there were portions of the concert that they don't remember. There were songs they don't remember being
Wow.
played. And of course, this has to do with what's going on stage. So you have the beat, you have the rhythmic part of the song going, you've got the frequency of the music, you have the lights, the lighting, flickering lights, strobe lighting, different color lights. This all affects the mind.
Oh yeah.
And so what happened to those people is that they tranced out during during the concert. Now, when you're in trance, folks, that doesn't mean that you're lying on the ground and you're passed out. You could be in a trance,
Yeah.
standing up and looking like you're alive and well, but you're lost. You're lost in thought.
Oh yeah.
You're
Oh yeah.
someplace else. I mean, think about here's a good example. For those of you who have kids, especially teenage boys, and they're upstairs playing their video games, and they're so entrenched in what's going on in that video game that you call your son down for dinner and he doesn't hear you. It's not that he's ignoring you. He does not hear you.
Yeah, he's gone mentally.
He's gone.
He's wrapped up in that game, that video game.
Right. So then when you go upstairs, you're like, hey, Billy, I've been calling you for dinner now for the last 5 minutes. Did you hear me?
Sure.
No, Mom, I didn't hear. I didn't hear you. So this is being in a trance state. So this is the same thing if you go to a Taylor Swift concert or any one of these
Sure.
concerts. The possibility that something like this could happen is possible.
Well, I'd imagine it triggers the endorphins. There's a variety of chemical reactions. You go into a trance state. It's. I think a lot of it's the way the music is structured and engineered and produced. I mean, you talked about the hook. Now, a hook can be a chorus. It can be a guitar part, like in Day Tripper.
Right.
That hook in Day Tripper is just world known. Everybody knows that hook, and it pulls you in. I remember hearing that as a kid,
Right.
and just getting shivers. Just oh my god. I don't know why. I hear it now, and I've heard it so many times I can't stand it. But the same thing with Can't Buy Me Love. I hate for all you folks that listen to music beyond 1968, but I'm stuck in the 60s in my head. But Can't Buy Me Love, the hook is the chorus.
Right.
And they start with the chorus for a reason because it grabs you, it pulls you in, and it doesn't let go till the song is over. So I think you go into kind of a trance based on the ways the songs are structured and engineered.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
And
if
what?
that song was sung in a lower range, it was like "Can't Buy Me Love,"
Yeah.
people would
No.
be like, "Ugh," but Paul's screaming it,
Right.
kind of, and I don't know what it does to the subconscious mind, but I think it grabs it pretty good.
Yeah. It pulls it in, and because it's exciting, it's
Yeah,
right. It's at a higher pitch, and it's bringing you in. It's we would call it cutting through the mix, right?
sure.
Right. So, and the way it works is they pull you in with the music, and once you're bought into not just the Beatles, but pick any band that people follow. I
Oh,
mean,
sure.
today Taylor Swift has the Swifties. That's a cult.
Oh, yeah.
The Swifties are a cult, and so what happens is once you're pulled in by the cult of celebrity and the cult of the music, then what happens is they can steer you because now they have followers,
Oh, yeah.
right? So with the Beatles, you get pulled into the music. You love the Beatles. You're buying all their records. You're sitting there for hours listening to the music, like you said, staring at the album covers and all this. And then the Beatles would come out and they do a press conference and they would say, "Well, I think this and we think that." And so now what's happening is, you know, because you're
Yeah.
into that mind control, you're bought into the cult. You're invested in it. So now what they say that they believe now becomes your beliefs.
Yes. Yeah.
You start to think in those terms as well because you're like, oh, okay, I didn't think of it that way, but because Paul McCartney and John Lennon or Mick Jagger or Keith Richards are saying this, then I'm going to listen to this. This is why so many musicians and entertainers and celebrities are rolled out anytime there's an agenda item that needs to be pushed. So, I mean, the big one recently was the March 2020 event with the face coverings and the shots, right?
Sure. Sure.
I mean, they rolled everybody out. I mean, they rolled out McCartney, they rolled
Yeah.
out, you know, they rolled everybody out, and
Every
that's
celebrity in the world. Yeah.
every celebrity in the world. So why is that? That's because of the mind control. It's because it starts off as hypnosis, and then they've got you hook, line, and sinker. They reel you in, and now they become they become your Pied Pipers.
Yeah.
They're going to tell you what it is that you should do, not do, what you should believe, not believe, where you should go, not go, and this is how they control the masses.
Oh, yeah.
Um, Essentially, what they are is they are social engineering tools in human form.
Exactly. Yeah.
You
There are
know?
tools in their toolkit to manipulate each and every one of
Yes.
us
Yeah.
and push different agendas.
Yes.
Um, I think it's kind of fascinating because I always wondered if the producers like George Martin, I don't remember who produced the Stones and all the other bands, but did they sit down specifically, or does a producer take an unknowing band into the studio, go, hey, I like this song, but let's arrange it like this, because the producer knows that it's going to create a certain mental effect because they're trying to sell records, number one. But I've always wondered if the producers and the engineers are the wizards behind the curtain, trying to manipulate the masses. Like, did
I
George Martin sit down and say, let's put the chorus first because that's going to grab them? I don't think Paul and John sat down and said, let's put the chorus first,
No.
if they even wrote that song.
Right.
Um, so there must be a whole science,
Yes.
either knowingly or unknowingly to the band, that's going on to structure it a certain way so it will sell and, get out to the masses.
Yeah. I think Pete, for the big time producers like a George Martin or Quincy Jones, I'm going to bet that they have a very good understanding of the social science behind using music as a way to shape society. and to create behavior modification. I'm not saying every producer is schooled in
Yeah.
this,
Yeah.
but there are those, I would say the big names have a pretty good idea on how to go about doing this. And then it also goes back to what I was saying before, the whole emulation piece of it. So it would go for producers too. So there will be producers. I'm going to assume there were producers that thought George Martin was the greatest thing since the light bulb as far as music production goes, right?
Yeah.
So they're going to emulate George Martin's style. How did George do this? How did George do that? You know, all of that. So even if they are not schooled um, in how to incorporate elements into the production of the music that's intended to affect people from a social engineering perspective, they're still doing it because what they're doing is, they're mapping to a template of somebody who does do that. So they're bringing in elements of George Martin into their production process,
Mm-hmm.
and you can create it that way too. That's the thing. There's a cascading effect as well. It's not just everybody has to be trained in this stuff.
True.
You get a
True.
few leaders, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then people follow and emulate those leaders. Right?
Well,
It's the thing when they talk about like self-help, and they'll say, pick somebody. If you want to be successful, pick somebody that you admire, somebody that's very successful, and
sure.
then study them. We hear this all the time in like
Yeah.
self-help
Oh yeah.
books,
Oh yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So what is that saying? It's saying be like them, do what they do, be like them. So I'm going to say that that little self-help technique is also applicable in the music industry.
Well, if you listen to modern music, they just repeat the same thing over and over and over. I can't pinpoint a specific song, but anytime I hear a current song, it's just maybe one or two verses and then they repeat the chorus 10, 15 times
Yeah.
or a certain phrase. And I'm like, they're just trying to condition people into feeling sad
Yes.
or feeling angry or I was in the locker room the other day. I was working out and there's music in the locker room and it's all classic rock and I started feeling really sad. I'm taking a leak and I'm feeling sad. I'm like, why am I feeling sad while I'm taking a leak? Well, here it was a Journey song, one of these sad Journey songs that I went to high school listening to from some girl broke up with me in 1982. And I'm sitting there feeling sad because, what's his name, Perry?
Yeah,
Or
Steve
who?
Perry.
Or I'm like, oh, it's because this Journey song is playing and I'm having a flashback mentally to 1982. And then I'm thinking, why do I need music in the locker room?
Right.
It's everywhere. Music is every. I went to a coffee shop the other day. I don't know if you have them on the East Coast. They're called Seven Brew. It's a drive-through coffee shop. And as you drive in, you're just awash in music from the PA system outside this coffee shop.
Yeah.
Modern pop rock. And I'm like, why is there music everywhere we go? And I just have a theory that it's because they're constantly trying to manipulate us.
Yes.
There's no need we have to have music everywhere. We've got in the restaurants, in the bathrooms, in the drive-throughs. And I think it's a tool they use
Gas
to put it.
stations too, Pete.
Oh yeah,
Go
yeah,
to pump your gas
at
and
the
it's
pump.
yeah.
Isn't that crazy? And there's video screens now on the gas pumps,
Yeah.
which I don't know why we have to watch video while we're. I don't know if you have those in the Carolinas, but
Yeah.
it's just insane. I'm sorry I go off on these tangents because I finally have someone that I can talk to that understands
No,
this.
no,
Because
it's great. It's great. Me too. I mean, a lot of
well,
times I'm talking to myself when I do this stuff.
well, I don't know what your wife thinks of this, but I try to talk to Meg and try to show her. But I'm afraid if I show her too much, she'll get depressed because she's still lost in it, and
Yeah,
it's her escape. And I'm like, I know if you bring somebody down too quick, it could have devastating effects on mentally and emotionally. I believe because when I started to realize all of that was going on with the media and the music and movies and TV, I just stepped. It was like this horrifying moment. Oh wait, it's all a lie. And I don't know if that sounds paranoid or sick, but I think it is.
it is.
I can't watch any. I can't. I hear Lester Holt come on NBC and I'm like, change the channel. I cannot listen to that guy. He's just a mouthpiece for the CIA or whoever runs the news media.
Yeah, no, it
So,
is all a lie, and it's very difficult for people to people who are, you know, in the matrix. I'll call it the matrix.
yeah, yeah.
They live and breathe it, and that's their reality, and they think that that's how the world really works. But we have to come to grips with the fact that, as an example, the media, and that would be your cable news, your network news, it would be your magazines, it would be your radio, it would be your
Oh, yeah.
television, it would be Netflix, it would be HBO, it would be Amazon Prime. All of this stuff is controlled. All of the media in this country, I think the number now is down to 5 companies. 5 companies control all of the media in
Hmm.
the United States. I think in Australia it's something like 2. But in any case, the point I'm trying to make is uh, that means that 5 people, if it's 5 companies these days, it used to be 6, but I think it's 5 now. That just means that 5 people at the top of these companies get together and decide what it is that they're going to tell you and not tell you, or how
Oh,
they're
yeah.
going to present, their stories. Uh, you have to understand, folks, that our media is it's just propaganda. That's all it is. It's propaganda. It's there. Your television set is a hypnosis box,
Oh, yes.
and
And even the way it refreshes, the rate of refresh on the screen, the hertz,
yes,
puts your brain into a trance, and your
yeah,
iPhone too.
drops you down to alpha state. So alpha
Hmm.
state is a trance state. In fact, we learn by going into trance state. So as an example, when you were a kid and you were in school, and let's just say you're sitting in the classroom and there's 30 kids in the class, you being one of the 30 kids. When the teacher was writing something up on the board or talking about something at the front of the classroom, did you pay any attention to any of the other 29 kids in the class? No, you were focused on what was being written on the board and or what the teacher was talking about. So when you're in a trance state, in your alpha state, what happens is you're basically excluding everything outside of you and your focus. It's your concentration and focus on whatever it is that you're paying attention to. That's how you learn. That's learning. We did the same thing when we were in college. We do the same
Hmm.
thing when we're learning music or playing a song. We do the same thing when we engage in a hobby. We're very, very focused. It's a high level of concentration, and we exclude everything else that's going on around us. It's like going
Sure,
back to the kid who's playing the video game, didn't hear his mother
sure,
calling him to come down to dinner, right? So um, that is how the television works as well. Many,
sure.
many people get pulled into it, and they are completely engulfed and invested in whatever it is that they're watching, whether it be the news or some reality TV show. And there's always, always, always an agenda.
Oh, yeah,
Always an agenda.
yeah.
If you know what to look for, you'll see that there's a repetition of agenda items that they want to push, that they want to condition the viewer to start to accept or not accept. So if there are certain things that they don't want you to believe in or certain values that they don't want you to have, those things will be ridiculed in movies and TV shows and so on. On the other hand, if there's things that they want you to buy into, that they want you to support on behalf of their agenda, those things will be played up in a very positive way.
Hmm.
And this goes on 24/7, 365 days a year into perpetuity. This will go on forever
Oh, yeah, oh,
unless
yeah.
people, wake up.
I don't know if I got you off track. We covered a lot of ground here,
Yeah, no,
but
whatever.
I
Yeah,
think I put a wrench into it because I think you were headed down one path and I went down someplace
that's
else.
okay.
Was there something else? I don't know if I got you off track about the whole frequency thing and music because we kind of went off in a couple different directions. Um,
Well, I think we kind of covered it. It's important to understand that music is used as a tool to social engineer. Music is another way to put people into hypnosis, into a trance state, and to get certain messages across.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, just take it from a very simplistic perspective. You're listening to the songs and there's the lyrics. Just take it from that perspective alone. So if you go back to, going back to the songs of the British invasion, classic rock, punk music, just pick a genre. And if you're constantly playing these songs, especially if you have a favorite artist, and most people do,
Yeah.
you're constantly listening to these songs, playing them over and over again. You're constantly listening to these lyrics.
Mm-hmm.
So I read the piece before about the rhythmic aspects of music. And from a science perspective, there's no question. I mean, it's not a theory.
Mm-hmm.
They absolutely know that music, because of frequency and repetition,
Yeah.
will condition people. In fact, it was Bertrand Russell in that article that you and I talked about earlier about the Beatles, hypnosis, and communism,
Sure.
where he was quoted. Bertrand Russell was an elite out of the UK, and he was like an elite. He had no use for the subjects. Everything needed to be run by the elites. That we can't make decisions for ourselves, and so we need an elite class to do all of that for us.
Mm.
And he very clearly said, going back to that article in 1965, that now, again, this is 60 years ago, he's being quoted
Sure.
and saying that verses put to music and repeated are extremely effective
Mm-hmm.
in shaping people and conditioning people to help the behavior modification along.
Sure. So the rhythm, the backing track is what gets you into the different state of mind in the subconscious,
Right,
and then the lyrics are the programming.
right,
If they want you to feel happy or sad or angry, like AC/DC, it's just an angry sound.
right.
I listen to that to work out too sometimes because it gets my blood pump. But when you listen to it, it's very dark. Again, the singer singing really high up, and it gets your brain in like this frenzy. So I think the words, I don't know what their words really tell you to do, but there must be some meaning behind some of these bands' words that they want you to listen to. Is that
Yeah.
what you're getting to, though? Like the
Yes.
words are what they're telling
Yeah.
you?
The lyrics are important.
Yeah.
Even if they're simple lyrics, and even if you don't think they're important, a lot of songs will in a subliminal way push sex.
Yes. Yeah.
In subliminal ways, they will push uh, anti family types of
Sure.
values.
Yeah.
If we take rap music, I mean that's the most prominent example of just extreme dysfunction as far as a cohesive society goes. I mean, a lot of the rap artists, um, and their songs were filled with violence,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
and of course, uh, rap was created for the very purpose of infiltrating the inner cities and creating this dysfunctional society within the inner
Oh,
city
yeah.
inner city population and creating violence. And none of this stuff is by chance. I mentioned in one of
No.
my shows, Pete, going back several months ago, there was an article in AARP magazine, and which I don't read. I mean, I get it for the discounts, but I don't. My wife and I go through the magazine to just kind of pull out all of the propaganda. AARP is loaded up with propaganda and fear tactics to
Oh, is
try
it
to.
really?
Oh my God! I mean,
Oh.
just to make the senior population very, very concerned and stressed
Oh, I didn't
out.
know that.
It's just unbelievable. It really is. And they almost always have an entertainer or celebrity.
Yes. Yeah. Ringo Starr was on it a couple months
Yes,
ago.
yes, and Samuel L. Jackson is on the
Yes.
current one. And so
Yeah.
that, again, this goes to the Pied Pipers. This goes to the people that you're going to follow and listen to, and they're going to say, you should do this, you should do that, you should think about this, you should think about that. And that's basically to shape you, to kind of get you to fall in line and march along single file toward a particular objective or agenda.
But
Um,
the thing that with Bertrand Russell that I now I agree with what he's saying, because back then America post-war was the nuclear family. They had the father who went to work,
right.
made enough money to support everybody, buy the house, have a car, have the food. Mother stayed at home. Life wasn't perfect, but for some reason, kids wanted to rebel. But what were they rebelling against? They were rebelling against stability, good jobs, a good economy. Now, after all this rock music hit in the 60s, the entire American family fell apart.
Yeah.
Both parents started working, divorces escalated, everything went to shit.
Yes.
And that's how I was, we were both in that
Hmm.
scene. And so I think whoever created rock and roll of the 60s, I think their plot worked or their scheme
Yeah.
worked to undermine the integrity of the American family and the
Yeah. It was
Western
Tavistock.
culture.
It was
Yeah.
Tavistock with feeds coming in from the Frankfurt School. So the Frankfurt School and Tavistock basically came into being at the same time in the early 1920s.
Okay.
So and all of these deep state entities, they're all interconnected. This is what people have to really understand. They're not standalone. They're not out there. They're not islands unto themselves. They're
Hmm.
all working together. And so, they knew exactly what they were doing. If you remember back, in fact, it's not even that long ago, but over the last 20, 30, 40 years, we would hear the term the culture wars. There's a
Hmm.
culture war. And I remember, listening to this back in the 70s and the 80s. And, I didn't think anything of it. I was young. The culture wars, I didn't care.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Whatever. But as I got older and I got more into the research, I knew exactly what they were talking about. So when they talk about the culture wars, the question that should have been asked is what cultures are at war? What, I mean, when you say culture wars, there's usually two people or two entities or two
Sure.
organisms
Sure.
fighting each other, right?
Sure.
So, but nobody ever asked that question. Nobody ever asked the question like, well, who were the two cultures? Well, the one culture was what you were just talking about. It was the traditional family with a family nucleus, mother and father, and the kids and all that stuff. That's one culture. That was the predominant American culture going back, before the counterculture of the 1960s. The other culture that was being implemented was the cultural Marxism, through the implementation of pop culture.
Mhm.
So pop culture is it's Netflix, it's your television, it's hot dogs, hamburgers, ball games. That's pop culture.
Yeah.
Because part of the traditional family nucleus, embedded in that for many families was an understanding of ancestral traditions going back to, let's say, if you were an Italian family. My mom is she's Italian. My father
Hmm.
was Welsh Irish, but we were brought up in an Italian household, so we had a lot of traditional Italian types of traditions in my household growing up.
Okay.
And so you'd have that, if you're French or German or Mexican, I mean, just pick a uh, a particular heritage. Um, but what the social scientists of Tavistock and the Frankfurt School needed to do was they needed to break that down. They needed to get rid of that, because if you have traditions and values outside of what they were looking to implement, then they can't implement their plan. So the whole cultural Marxist agenda was to systematically and methodically continue to bang away at the family nucleus,
Oh, yeah.
and in order to get it to the point where it's dismantled. And you mentioned, divorce rates now are up over 50%. Mothers and fathers are both working. The kids are in preschool. They're in after school. They've essentially have become detached from their families. The parents
Sure.
see the kids maybe very early in the morning, late in the evening when mom and dad get home from work, on the weekends, but mom and dad had a lot of errands to run on the weekends. So,
Yeah.
so what happens is the kids then become essentially wards of the state, and they are being raised by people outside the family.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I mean, what are the values of the people outside of the family? Are they the values of the mother and father? I mean, you don't know. What
Yeah.
are they really being taught in after school? I mean, we now see in schools, like in elementary schools and middle schools and even high schools, where they've gone with and I use the word very loosely, the curriculum,
Yeah.
and teaching little kids at 5 and 6 years old that there's really no such thing as a specific gender
Oh, I
until you
know.
get to a certain point. This is all part of the process of breaking down.
Yeah.
Okay, this is the cultural Marxist agenda that's in play, that has been in play for a long time. Before it got to that, what they did was they had to get the mother out of the house, because most mothers back in the day were perfectly happy staying home, taking care of the kids and taking care of the home, while dad was out working and making sure everybody had a roof over their head.
Mhm.
And everybody wants to say, well, the cultural Marxist and the far left uh, aspect of society wants to say, oh, that's old fashioned. Things have changed, and
Yeah.
no, things have changed not because it was old fashioned. Things would change because it was systematically attacked.
Well, sure. I think what the communists and the Marxists did is they said, okay, here's America. It's a massive country with multiple climates. And back then it was like 200 million people. We can't just park our ships off the shore and invade. And we can't nuke them because the land won't be inhabitable. So how do we destroy them? Well, we'll infiltrate their police stations and their politicians and their
Right?
White House, and
Academia.
will academia will destroy the family. And they I mean, look at us. Look, I mean, people are so confused. They don't know if they're boys or girls. They don't know what restroom to go in. They don't know, you
Yeah.
know, you can't afford anything now.
No.
Um, I mean, if I was ever single, I don't know how I'd survive. How do single people survive? So I think they've methodically destroyed our country
Yes.
without firing a shot, is what I'm trying to say. And I think that's just what they were trying to do, and I think they've succeeded.
Yeah. It's a whole problem, reaction, solution, right? So
Yeah.
it's to create the problem. There's going to be a reaction. People like, I can't deal with this. I can't live. I can't afford this. I can't afford that. I can't afford food, a home,
Yeah. Yeah.
so on, right? And then the solution is going to be, well, we have to put this egalitarian system into place, communism, right? Marxism, but
Yeah.
they'll refer to it as egalitarian, which it's not. You know, Whenever you look at any of the any communist structure around the world, it's not egalitarian. I mean, there's still an elite structure sitting on
Hmm.
top of the masses, the population.
Yeah.
So the whole thing that this is ultimately going to be a system where everybody's going to be equal, uh, it's just total nonsense. I mean, here's a
Oh
quote
yeah.
from going back to the Frankfurt School. Now, the other thing I should mention, the Frankfurt School, the Rothschilds are from Frankfurt, Germany,
Hmm.
and there's a lot. Germany is a hotbed for Marxism, and I mean, won't get into it in this show because it's a higher discussion. But think about the Beatles in Hamburg, Germany,
Oh yeah.
and Hamburg is one of the media capitals of Germany, and it's about a 5 or 6 hour drive from the Frankfurt School.
Wow.
Okay, and the Rothschilds, like I said, they hail from Frankfurt. But here's a quote from Max Horkheimer. Max was one of the quote intellectuals from the Frankfurt School. So I mentioned about how Lenin Marxism was really defined by violence and revolution, and the Frankfurt School, their version of Marxism was, hey, we can't do that. We're not going to win anything by doing that. So we've got to do this, very systematically and very subliminally. So
Hmm.
this is a quote: "The revolution won't happen with guns. Rather, it will happen incrementally, year by year, generation by generation. We will gradually infiltrate their educational institutions and their political offices,
Yep.
transforming them slowly into Marxist entities as we move towards universal egalitarianism." So they use the word egalitarianism. But the way they do this is to gaslight the population. They tell
Oh
you
yeah.
they either tell you what you want to hear and then do the complete opposite. We see this all the time with
Oh yeah.
politics,
Oh yeah.
all the time with politics. Or they will look challenge your thinking to the point where you start to doubt yourself, you start to question yourself, and
Oh
then
yeah.
what happens is then you start to self-sabotage. An example I use with this is when they went after the family nucleus. What the cultural Marxists did, you know, um, their program was to go to women through the media and to convince them that, why do you want to be home? Is that what you really want to do? Do you really
Hmm.
want to stay home and take care of your kids and take care of the home? I mean,
Yeah.
don't you
Yeah.
want to do what your husband does? Don't you want to go out to work? Don't you want to do
Yeah.
that? Now, a lot of women were perfectly happy with staying home
Yeah.
and taking on a traditional role. But what happened was it's repetition. We keep going back to repetition.
Oh yeah.
It was beating them
Yeah.
over the head over and over and over
Yeah.
again in the media, in
Yeah.
movies, in TV, in magazines like Parent
S-
Magazine,
Sitcoms.
sitcoms,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
right, that just kept hammering away to the point where women took the bait. A lot of women took the bait. Now, to help them take the bait, what they also did was to make it very difficult to own a home and have a life on one income. So, I mean, if you can have a life and a decent home on one income, then, well, one parent can stay home. But if you can't do that and you need two incomes to be able to do that, well, there you go. Now the mom has got to leave the home and go to work.
Exactly. Yep.
I mean, people think that this is crazy stuff. They think that, oh, this is just conspiratorial stuff, that, this guy, Mike, he's crazy.
Oh yeah.
And,
Yeah.
but, Pete,
You
but the,
see it now.
the crazy part is the people that believe that this is all coincidence. I mean, every day you wake up and you can systematically see, if you wake up, what's going on.
Yeah.
You can see like the levers they're pulling down or pulling up, the buttons that they're pushing, the switches that are going up
Oh
and
yeah.
down to be able to maneuver and to manipulate.
Well, I don't know if you follow Candace Owens. Do you follow her at all?
Occasionally, I'll listen to her. Yes.
Well, she's got this whole thing where she's discovered that Kamala Harris's father was a Marxist. I think it was her father, or her grandfather. It was her father was a Marxist, and that Kamala poses as a young lady with this woman that she claims was her grandmother, but Candace discovered that it wasn't her grandmother; it was help. It was a black woman that was help or a
She said it was
maid.
her mother.
Yeah, she said it was her mother or her
Yes,
grandmother.
it wasn't her mother in her
And,
book.
but
Yeah.
anyway, Kamala's a Marxist.
Yes.
And she's, oh, no, 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 I'm not. And she goes out there and cackles and laughs and tries to gaslight us. But it turns out I'm seeing all of this now. It's like, okay, they're trying to get her into office so they can perpetuate what they've been
Yeah.
doing for years. I don't know what Trump is. But it's funny when you start to see it all, you begin to go, well, what do I just go live in the mountains,
Yeah.
and build a cabin, or you see it everywhere.
Well, most people don't even know what a Marxist is. They don't even know what it represents, Peter. That's the problem. So it's the term has been the term does not have the same impact as it
Yeah.
used to have because people don't understand the history. They don't understand going back to Karl Marx and understanding the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, understanding the Frankfurt School and everything else, in between. But
Hmm.
they have a lot of terms. So Marxist, communist. You'll hear some of these politicians. Hillary Clinton used to say that she was a progressive. Well, progressive is another term for Marxist.
Sure.
So if Kamala Harris turns around and says, I'm not a Marxist, I'm not a communist, I'm a progressive." A progressive, I mean, in the minds of the average person means they're progressing, they're moving forward, right? And
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
they interpret that as moving forward to a better place. No, it doesn't mean that. It means progress means moving forward. It doesn't mean you're moving forward to a better place.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that.
Who knows where you're going to end up.
The other,
They don't tell you where you're going to end up.
Obama was the same thing. Obama was a
Yeah.
Marxist progressive, and his slogan was hope and change, right? Hope and change. What does that mean? What does hope and change mean? Well, it's open for interpretation. The word hope and change means different things to different people, right? So that's why they throw these little taglines out there, and that's how they pull people in, because they know that it's leading. It's they're going to leave it to the person to interpret what it means. They will never define what hope means. They will never define what their version of change means. They're going to leave it to you to interpret it.
And a lot of their taglines I've seen are in Marxist doctrine. I don't know if hope and change is one of them, but some of the things, their mantras are very Marxist.
But part of the cultural Marxist game plan is they create slogans.
Yes. Yeah.
So if you research cultural Marxism and you research the Frankfurt School and these other entities that are involved in this, slogans are very important. Very important, because people grab onto slogans, and most people just parrot whatever it is that they hear from the television set. So slogans are very important for them to be able to push their agenda forward.
Hey there, everybody. PT Pop here with All Four Lobes of My Brain securely bound behind my back, and welcome to another episode of PT Pop, a mind revolution, where I lead you out of the rabbit hole, one grain of truth at a time. Today, I've got a great show for you today. I've had Mike on the show a couple times before. He's had me on his show. Today, we're talking with Mike Williams, the extraordinary Beatles conspiracy researcher, and he's known worldwide. His presentations and interviews on the McCartney and the Beatles conspiracy have achieved over 5 million views worldwide. I was just trying to draw the line, the connection between Tavistock, Adorno, and the Beatles, and just kind of break it down. Because if it weren't for you, I would have no idea either that person or that entity existed. And I've read more of the Billy Shear's book.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating. It's just fascinating, especially what you see what's going on with the lies in our own government right now, with the attempted Trump's assassination and there's different spins on that story and how they try to manipulate everybody and turn it into a thing. So that's kind of what I was trying to do with the Tavistock and things like that.
It's all controlled, Peter. At the end of the day, that's what we have to understand. And I've been talking about this for a very long time. There's very little, if anything, in our world, in our reality, that is organic or natural. I mean, your family is organic and natural if you have children and so on. I'm talking about the interactions that we have with institutions, with politics and the media, the military, academia, all of that stuff is completely controlled, because there is an agenda. There is a one world agenda. And a lot of people used to think that that type of talk was from conspiracy theorists and tinfoil hat wearers. And now what's happened is so much is being rolled out now by the controllers that they're no longer hanging in the shadows. They're coming out into the open, and they're talking about their plans, and they're talking about where they want to go. And I point people to the World Economic Forum. Go to their website. If you think what I'm saying is crazy stuff, go read their website, because they're telling you everything that's on their agenda and where they think they're going.
Let's start with Tavistock. What is that? And, where did it come from? And, I'll let you take it from there, because I think that's fascinating. Tavistock is just a fascinating entity in and of itself.
We have to understand, first of all, that there is a internationalist organization and structure. That's what I try to explain that to my audience, that whenever you see the word world or international in front of some organization, that is part of the one world controlling apparatus.
Okay.
So as an example, we have the United Nations, United Internationalist, One World. We have the World Bank. We have the World Court. We have the Bank of International Settlements. We have the International Monetary Fund. We have organizations like the World Economic Forum, the Bilderbergs, the Trilaterals, the Council on Foreign Relations. These are all deep state internationalist organizations that are controlling the world across all ends of the spectrum.
And they're run by billion, if not trillionaires, right? They're the richest people in the world run these institutions.
Yes. So you have, it's all tiered. So the higher you go up the pyramid, the more shadowy and the darker these people become. As an example, one of the a very powerful yet very secret society is the Black nobility. So very few people know who the Black nobility are, who are members of the Black nobility, but they sit toward the upper tier of the pyramid. So what you have is this system is run by occultists. So when I say occultists, I'm not just talking about sorcerers, although there are sorcerers and witchcraft, those types of things are involved. What we're talking about is it's the hidden hand. So occult or occultism simply means something is hidden. So we don't know about it. So they go about their business with this hidden hand, and what they present to the public is nothing more. It's a veneer. And they tell you that that's your reality.
Yeah.
Behind that veneer, behind that curtain, there's the Great Oz, and there's all of these levers and buttons and all of these mechanisms that they're pulling and pushing every single day to manipulate the world, to march toward their end goal. Their end goal is a one world government, one world religion. And they have been at it for a very, very long time. And I've argued that really the internationalist system that's in place today really has been alive and well, and really got a lot of traction after World War II. It existed before that, clearly, but it was after World War II that they set their sights on the United States. Before World War II, they were focused on Europe. So it's divide and conquer. So during World War I, that's where they were focused on making the changes they needed to make within the nation states in Europe. And then once they got to World War II, then the bullseye was on the U.S. So you have this kludge of secret societies, and I oversimplify it by saying it this way, but it's an effective way to explain it. Think of it as the overarching secret society is Freemasonry. And then within Freemasonry, you have multitudes of secret societies that work together, and they have a common goal. The common goal is to control. It's world domination. It's world control. And the one thing that the controllers are very good at, that we, the masses, are not very good at, is they are able to set aside their differences for the larger goal. So it's not to say that they don't have disagreements and there aren't factions that have friction between them within the pyramid of power, but they're able to sit down and say, okay, look, let's keep our eye on the ball. Let's get into the end zone. And then once we're there, once we achieve what it is we're looking to achieve, then we can sit at the table and we can hash through what our differences are, and we'll get that resolved. Whereas most of the population does the exact opposite. Nobody wants to march into the end zone until all of their idiosyncrasies and their differences have been resolved beforehand. And then, hypothetically, they will move forward. But as you know, since all of these different positions and ideas and thoughts and positions that people have can never be resolved satisfactory to everybody's satisfaction, they're not going to move the ball forward. And again, I'm talking about the masses in general, but the controllers themselves are very, very good at being able to set aside their differences and move forward.
Okay.
You know, so, and Tavistock is part of that internationalist structure. So it's really not that complicated. Just think of it as it's a world government that's in place. And so the world government has its courts, it has banking for the monetary system, it has the United Nations. Well, like every corporation, they have to have their marketing, sales, and propaganda arm, right? They have to have that.
Mm.
So think of Tavistock in that vein. And their job is to social engineer the masses to formulate the execution of the strategies that either they develop themselves or the strategies that come down to Tavistock. So above them, there's the Committee of 300, and a great book on that, and I highly recommend people read it, is a book by John Coleman. It's titled The Committee of 300, The Conspirators' Hierarchy. And Dr. Coleman released this book in the early 1990s. I think it was 92 or 93. So it's about 30 years ago. And what you'll find is when you go through this book, it will hit you that he's talking about a level of control, Peter, that existed 30 years ago that will boggle your mind. And now it's 30 years later.
Oh, yeah.
It's also in this book where he talks about the Beatles being a creation of Tavistock. Now, this book is not about the Beatles. I always have to explain this to folks. The book is about the Committee of 300 and the controlling system, the controlling matrix.
Okay.
But
so the idea of Tavistock creating the Beatles wasn't your idea. You were turned on to it by this book.
Yeah. So what happened was, in the Memoirs of Billy Shears, going back maybe 2 or 3 editions ago, there was a blurb on page 350 going into page 351. And I don't know if those words are still on that page anymore. And that's
Might not
book.
be. Yeah.
Yeah. I think mine was maybe the 2018 edition, maybe. I'm not really sure. But Tom has made some updates to the book, Tom U. Harriet, who's the author / encoder. So I don't know if some of the wording and the pages have shifted around a little bit. But in any case, back when the edition I read on page 350 and 351, at the very bottom of page 350, I'll never forget this, Pete, the narrative said that George Martin was going to take their little songs, talking about the Beatles songs, their little songs, and make them famous and make them great. And when I was reading the book, I thought, well, that's kind of an interesting way to explain it. He's going to take their little songs. So in other words, the narrative was marginalizing the Beatles' songwriting. And then on the next page, it talked about the Committee of 300 and the snitch. So, I mean, I knew of the Committee of 300, and I'm looking at, and I'm reading the paragraph, and I'm thinking, the snitch. Well, I knew that the Committee of 300 was written by John Coleman. I hadn't read the book yet, but I had watched interviews that John Coleman did back in the day. There's one, in fact, that I have on my main YouTube channel. I think it goes back to the late 90s, maybe early 2000. And so I thought, is Memoirs talking about John Coleman in the book, The Memoirs of Billy Shears? So I went and bought the book, The Committee of 300, and I read it, and lo and behold, there it was. So there's about maybe 8 to 10 mentions in the book about Tavistock and the Beatles. And Coleman talks about how Theodore Adorno was heavily involved in the writing of the Beatles' music. So this is something that he talks about. And again, I want to reiterate, the book is not about the Beatles. It's about the Committee of 300 and Tavistock and the controlling system. But because the Beatles are such a huge psychological operation, they get notable mention whenever Tavistock was discussed in the book.
So who is Theodore Adorno, and what is his relation to Tavistock? Or is there a correlation between the two?
Yeah. So the first thing we need to do is let's just back up and understand Tavistock, and then we'll get into Adorno. So Tavistock was an outgrowth of Wellington House, which was the propaganda arm for the British military during World War I. So Wellington House was responsible for coming up with all of the propaganda. To their first order of business was to get the British people to agree to build consensus to go to war with Germany. And this was a very tall order because the British had no reason to want to go to war with Germany. They viewed the Germans as their neighbor, and they had no issues with the Germans. And that was a big problem in the very beginning of World War I because the British were trying to march forward. They were trying to instigate the war with Germany. And the British people were stepping back and saying, we don't support this. It's the same thing that happened to the United States in World War II. And Tavistock had their hands in that as well with FDR. So Tavistock was given the mission, or Wellington House was given the mission of getting the British people on board to build consensus to go to war. And through a massive propaganda campaign, which included flyers and pamphlets saying that the Kaiser and his military were bayoneting babies and all that stuff. I mean, none of that stuff was true, but it's the same type of thing we saw with the United States during the Iraq War, where they had the diplomat's daughter at the time, and nobody told us it was a diplomat's daughter, who said that the Iraqis were taking babies out of incubators and killing them. That never happened either. So it's a very similar story. So they built this entire propaganda program, and it was highly successful. And then once the war was over, the Wellington House essentially just transitioned over to the Tavistock Clinic. Now, when it was the Tavistock Clinic, and this was 1921, if I recall, what they were doing was taking soldiers from World War I who were traumatized from the war, shell-shocked, and they were bringing them in for psychiatric evaluation and treatment.
Mm-hmm.
Very dubious. So they basically had established themselves a base of patients or subjects that they were going to experiment on from a psychiatric and psychological perspective. Now, this continued on for a very long time. Tavistock, again, as the clinic, was established in 1921, and they are alive and well today. So we're in 2024. And what I've explained to my audience is Tavistock has been in the business of social engineering and mass mind manipulation, behavioral modification for 120 years. That's a long time to be majoring something. So they infuse themselves into every facet of governments, into politics, into the corporate world, into the military, into academia. I mentioned about World War II with Franklin Delano Roosevelt. His job too was to try to get the United States to go to war in World War II, because before that, the United States was not interested in going to war, because at the time it was viewed as Europe's war. We didn't have any business being over there. So Tavistock deployed its agents. One of them was Edward Bernays, who's considered the godfather of propaganda, to the United States. And they started formulating the propaganda program under FDR to get the American public to enter into the war. And it was the same thing. We had all of these pamphlets, and remember the movie shorts when people would go to the theater
Oh, yeah.
about the evil Germans and all of this. And
Oh,
then
sure.
later on, it was the Japanese. This was all the doing of Tavistock. They have been at it for a very long time. They are extremely good at it. And if you go to their website, it looks like motherhood and apple pie. If you read it, I mean, you know, just for the benefit of the world and,
Yeah.
you know, all that stuff. But when you get into what they're really about, and let me just do this for the audience, Pete. There's two great books that I recommend for people who want to get acclimated and to get a baseline on Tavistock. The first one is
Okay.
this book, which was released in 2008. It's Daniel Estulin's book, Tavistock, the Tavistock Institute, Social Engineering the Masses. And the other book is another John Coleman book, a fantastic book. Coleman's exceptionally good at writing his books because he has 30-something chapters in here, but he writes his chapters very short and sweet. He gets right to the point.
Okay.
Okay, so it's not real dense. He makes his points and then he moves on. But this book, Tavistock Institute of Human Relations, Shaping the Moral, Spiritual, Cultural, Political, and Economic Decline of the United States of America. This is a very, very good book. And another book leading into all of this, because we're going to talk about cultural Marxism, is another book by John Coleman. He was very prolific with his writing. And this one is titled The Rothschild Dynasty.
Has Coleman passed on?
I believe he's very old if he's still alive. The last time I checked, he was in his 80s, and this goes back a few years ago. So I tried to locate him. I tried to get a contact for him going back about, I would say 4 years ago, and I couldn't find anything. His website was defunct because he's almost the same age as my mom. Mom's 89. So, you know, he said what he had to say, and you get older and you move on. So I don't know if he's still alive.
Okay. It'd be cool to have him on as a guest. So,
it'd be great
for yourself.
A wealth of knowledge, but I could not find a good contact for him. If somebody out there is listening to this and has a good contact for Dr. Coleman, and if he's still alive, please feel free to contact me or Pete, and we'll connect with him.
Excellent.
So that's Tavistock, and you know, I went through it real quick, and I have some notes here. Let me just read this here.
Okay.
So they have far-reaching influence throughout governments, non-government organizations, otherwise referred to as NGOs. A lot of NGOs operate through the United Nations. The private business sector, so this would be your corporate world. Public and private institutions, mass media, global think tanks, the military, education, and of course the music and entertainment industry. So they have their hooks into everything.
Everything, yeah.
So their methods to overcome obstacles is social engineering, otherwise known as brainwashing, conditioning, and indoctrination. They look to reshape and redefine values, morals, beliefs, and ethics, and to create a new culture. So the culture that most people live in today and embrace is pop culture. So pop culture was delivered to us by Tavistock and the Frankfurt School from the cultural Marxists.
Okay.
It's not our true culture. Our true culture would be our ancestral culture. So as an example, I'm Italian and Welsh. So from my mom's Italian side, we would have Italian traditions. And what the controllers have done was to erase and to get all of that ancestral and family traditions off the table, because that's in their way. They need everybody to be on the same page. So what they look to do is homogenize society and the culture. And pop culture does that. So, you know, what's pop culture? Pop culture is Netflix, it's hamburgers, it's hot dogs, it's beer, it's ball games. You know, that's a far cry from our heritage and our ancestral culture. So they look to break down traditional structures, and we'll get into this. So when we talk about traditional structures, we're talking about family values, beliefs, and institutions, such as religious institutions. They have had an all-out war on Christianity because they need Christianity out of the way, and we'll get into that in a little bit. They implement a diametrically opposing framework to the existing structures. So this would be like the counterculture of the 1960s would be a good example of that. Free love, drugs, androgyny, multiculturalism, moral equivalency. Who's to say that that's wrong or who's to say that that's right? Everybody has a different perspective. And we'll get into that too. That gets into critical theory and the Frankfurt School.
And just real quick, I just want to mention that when I think of the 60s and the hippie movement, I was just a little kid. I was like 2, 3 years old. But when I look back in the history books, it seems like it just appeared out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And that to me is part of it. They engineered it to come in at this time when the youth was vulnerable, was spearheaded by the Beatles. At first, maybe it was Elvis, but then the Beatles kind of blew the doors open.
Right. And
everybody started growing their hair and doing drugs. And then the hippie movement just appeared. All of a sudden people got their hair down to their waist and they're smoking dope. And I even as a kid, I'm like, where did this come from? And why are people doing this? And, I even questioned things when I was really little, but I think you're getting to that. I think that's kind of what you're alluding to.
Yeah. It's all scripted and orchestrated. It's engineered to happen. And we'll get into that too, because what we'll do is we'll talk about the Frankfurt School and then we'll get into the Beat movement, which was the precursor leading into the Beatles. So everything has a step on the ladder, Pete. They just don't dive into something. So it's very incremental and it's very methodical how they go about their change, because if they go about it too abruptly, then people are going to turn around and say, hold on a second, what's going on here? So they want to build it nice and slow so that you acclimate and assimilate. And they've made a lot of advances over the years. Decadence is something else that is very, very key to the Frankfurt School and Tavistock and cultural Marxism. And of course, they want to lower critical thinking. And this is all done through your media and your television shows, just to relegate people to just nonsense stuff. In Daniel Eschelin's book, he makes some very good points. And two of them that I just latched onto, he said, one of the things that Tavistock is really, really good at is creating cults. And the reason why the creation of cults is important, because cults have leaders and then you have cult followers. So even things that don't seem like a cult are actually a cult. As an example, religion is a cult. Following your bands like the Beatles is a cult. And people who follow certain entertainers and celebrities, there's a cult mentality. There's a pop culture. So the word culture has the word cult in it. And so they create all these different buckets and factions because they know that one piece is not going to fit all. So they create lots of buckets and lots of cults. But at the end of the day, they're all organized so that these cults with their cult followers march in the same direction. Even if it's not obvious, but if you take a look years down the line, you're going to see, hey, they're all turning this way. Right? And we'll get into that in a little bit as well. The common thread that we'll find with Tavistock, with the Frankfurt School and cultural Marxism is a common thread of, I'll mention Tavistock in a second. I said there was 2 points that Daniel Eschelin made. Let me go to that now. The other point that Daniel made is Tavistock looks to relegate the adult mind down to that of a child's thinking. So that's where we lose the critical thinking faculties. Everything becomes very based in emotions, very reactive. People are not thinking rationally and logically. They're not listening and to a point, counterpoint. They're very reactive. They're very emotional. And a lot of times what happens is they lash out. They become angry. And even there's times when it resorts in violence.
It's like a tantrum, like a child having a tantrum.
It's like, right, they're having a tantrum. And one of the reasons why they love this is because, and we see this now taking place in the UK, in England, where they're having all these riots. All of these riots that are taking place, they've all been orchestrated and instigated with agent provocateurs, because from the controller's mindset, the more out of control something is, the more they can come out and say, we have to institute control.
Mm-hmm.
So right, it's problem, reaction, solution. So they create the problem. The solution's going to be, reaction's going to be, people are very upset and angry, and they're distraught and they're nervous about what's going on with all this violence. And then they present the solution. It's like, oh, well, you know what? We can squash this. We will need more surveillance, a bigger police state. This is, and this is why we need things like digital ID passports, so we know that, who everybody is. And this is why we need facial recognition software.
Yeah.
Right. So they create all of this stuff. And so I was going to say the common thread with all of this, when we talk about Tavistock, Frankfurt, and cultural Marxism, is there's a psychological piece to this, behavioral modification, as I mentioned before, and hedonism. So those two things go together: behavioral modification, psychological manipulation, and hedonism or decadence. Because the hedonism and the decadence, what that does is that breaks down society, breaks down society norms. And from the perspective of the controllers, this is, they view this as an alchemical process. So in order to bring about the new, you have to eliminate the old or the existing. And this is a tenet that Crowley teaches as well. He talks about, in order to bring in the new, nothing from the previous can exist.
So
you
to
have to erase it.
So undermine the Christian values, they turn the population into hedonists. So we focus more on self-pleasure, pornography, sexual gratification, booze, drugs, and we become so immersed in that. It's a form of control, and then they can do what they want with us. And you're leading to that, but that's like, I've seen it firsthand. I look around me, like everybody's wrapped up in their Teslas and there's a Dunkin' Donuts that opened up the street down from me. We've got 2 Dunkin' Donuts now for some reason. The line of people was down the street on the sidewalk for donuts and coffee. I'm like, why? I mean, but because they just think it's just donuts and coffee. But that's a whole nother thing. But it's kind of the same thing. They distract us with sugar and fast food and food deserts and things.
That's the pop culture.
Yeah.
Exactly. No, you're right on point, because we had a similar situation going back a few years ago when they opened a Krispy Kreme in my town. And I can care less about Krispy Kreme donuts. Yeah. They're donuts, right? Yeah. And they have coffee. So what? So does 500 other stores. Yeah. Right, within the vicinity. And it was the same thing, Pete. There were people lined up. You would think that they were handing out money. Oh, yeah. And I could not believe the line all around the Krispy Kreme. And really? This is the problem. Yeah. It was unbelievable. It was the same thing. And this is the problem that we have with society. And the problem is very few people take the time to step back and assess it, because they're so wrapped up in all of the materialistic goodies that are presented to them on any given day. Like you said, whether it be donuts, whether it's going to be TV sets or the new phone or the new car, whatever. People are completely caught up in this materialistic world. Yes. Yeah. And what that does is that pulls people away from their spiritual connections. And we've gotten to the point now where a lot of times when we talk about spiritual connections, and when I'm talking about spiritual connections, I'm talking about connection back to source, the creator, God, back to the divine, understanding more about metaphysics. You're contemplating what your purpose is in life, why are you here? Are you actually here to stand online at the Krispy Kreme because a new store opened up? Is that really why you're here? So they don't want any of that because they don't want people philosophizing. They don't want people being introspective. They don't want any of that stuff. They want everything to be at a very basic, at a veneer, like I mentioned before, very topical, and just to go about your homogenized life and just go with the flow.
Yeah.
Don't stir up any problems. So anyway, so that's Tavistock, and going through some of the attributes of what it is that they bake into their agendas and into their initiatives. You know, the Beatles were a psychological operation, a massive psychological operation, as was the entire British invasion. Now, Tavistock is out of London, and there's a good reason why they refer to the British invasion as the British invasion. It was because it was the British secret societies, along with secret societies across the world, including those here in the United States, who were looking to usurp the current system and to begin the process of breaking it down and implementing their one world order. Now let's talk about the Frankfurt School, and that will lead us into Theodore Adorno. Okay. So Tavistock originates out of Wellington House, and there's a history before that as well, but I won't get into that. We'll just start with Wellington House going forward. That's 120 years of history. I think for the purposes of our show, that'll suffice.
Yeah.
The Frankfurt School was established in 1923. So think of it as 2 years after Tavistock formed the Tavistock Clinic. Coincidence? No, not really. I should also mention that Tavistock, Sigmund Freud was their poster child, and I mentioned Edward Bernays was also part of the Tavistock system. Now, the Frankfurt School was not a school in itself. It was really an adjunct to Frankfurt University, and it was comprised of Marxist intellectuals at Frankfurt University in the 1920s and the 1930s. So think in terms of you had this think tank of Marxist intellectuals that were operating for about 2 decades. And when we talk about the Frankfurt School, they're connected at the hip with Tavistock, as is the Fabian Society, which was another secret society out of Britain that was closely aligned with the Frankfurt School, with Tavistock, and all of these other secret societies and these organizations that were looking to implement a one world order. And many of them, like the Fabians, were into eugenics big time, as were the Frankfurt School group too, but the Fabians more so, based upon my research. They were heavily into the concept of eugenics or depopulation. So when you read about the Frankfurt School, of course, when you go to Wikipedia and you go to any of the online mainstream resources, it's like Tavistock's website. It's going to read like motherhood and apple pie. You're going to think, oh, well, this doesn't seem so bad, you know? And they're going to talk in terms of being altruistic, an egalitarian world where everything is equal. There is no class structure. This is the type of stuff that you're going to read. So the question, when I was reading all this, and I was reading the books that were really digging in, the question I asked was, well, was the Frankfurt School really altruistic and egalitarian, or were they gaslighting us? And I came to the conclusion that it was a lot of gaslighting. So one of the approaches that the Frankfurt School was engaged in is to make people think illogically. So if I say black, you say white. If I say left, they say right. So if I say the sky is blue, they'll say, no, it's really not, it's green.
Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
the objective of the Frankfurt School and a lot of these elite organizations was to continue to push that type of dialectic in order to slowly get people to question their own logic and ability to reason. So Bertrand Russell, who is a British elitist, he died in the 1970s, a big time one world, new world order type. Here's a quote. The objective is to produce an unshakable conviction that snow is black. And that's what I was talking about. Now, what the Frankfurt School, the way they looked at that and said, well, if we get to gray, we win. So Bertrand Russell is saying, if I can get you to think that snow is black, the Frankfurts were saying, we'll settle with gray, because once you think that snow is gray, we've won.
Yeah, you've won.
Right? The war for the mind.
They do it all the time on the news.
All the time. Well, if we go to the whole thing with transgender and telling us that a child's gender is not defined when they're born, that they have time to decide that. That's a perfect example of what we're going to get into, which is critical theory from the Frankfurt School. That's a perfect example of telling people that snow is black or that men could lactate.
Yeah.
It's the same thing.
Yeah.
So there were more than four, but there were four primary players at the Frankfurt School. There was Max Horkheimer, Theodor Adorno, Herbert Marcuse, and Erich Fromm. And they were all cultural Marxists. And they had a different approach to Marxism, Pete, than what was experienced before. So during the Russian Revolution, which was really the Bolshevik Revolution during the World War I period in Russia, that was Lenin Marxism. Lenin Marxism is denoted by violence. So they're going to achieve their goals, their Marxist goals, worldwide Marxism, by implementing war and violence. So they're going to take we're going to hit you over the head with a hammer approach to be able to get Marxism at a worldwide level. Well, the Frankfurt School cultural Marxists, Horkheimer, Adorno, Marcuse, and Fromm, these guys turned around and said, bad approach, because you're not going to win anything that way. You can't do it through violence. So you have to subvert from within. So it's a much more incremental and methodical approach to do it this way, but in the end, it's far more effective, because people won't even realize that they're being subverted and commandeered. They will just go along to get along, and a decade will go by, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years, and before you know it, you're in a completely different system because people completely lost perspective on the baseline. They don't remember the baseline anymore. So if we take a quote from Max Horkheimer, and I pulled this a while back. This comes from Henry Mackow's website. And by the way, Henry is Jewish, for those that,
Well, Adorno was too, right?
Yes, they all were. They were Jewish cultural Marxists. This is something that people don't like to talk about it, because whenever you talk about the Jewish control system, people recoil.
Yeah. And they call you a Nazi.
And there's no reason to recoil, because it is what it is. There's no problem with saying, you talk about a Catholic control system, or you talk about Christianity, or you talk about Hindus or Buddhists. But if you say the word Jew or Jewish, people get really nervous. And like I said, they recoil. So Max Horkheimer said the following. This is a quote. And Horkheimer was one of the leading Jewish Marxists of the Frankfurt School, which pioneered cultural Marxism. The revolution, and he's talking about the Marxist revolution, won't happen with guns. Now, remember, they were saying, hey, Lenin had it all wrong with his guns and his violence. Rather, it will happen incrementally, year by year, generation by generation. We will gradually infiltrate their educational institutions and their political offices, transforming them slowly into Marxist entities as we move towards universal egalitarianism. So they keep talking about, universal egalitarianism, but that's really not what they're talking about. I mean, really, it's to pigeonhole the population, the masses, into a one world Marxist state. That's what they're looking to do. And interestingly enough, back in the early 1900s, this document came out. It's called the Protocols of Zion. And I've had this for many years. It's not easy to find on the internet anymore because they don't want anybody reading it.
Okay.
But what it is it's a document which is basically the game plan of the Jewish Marxists and how they're going to go about changing the world. And as an example, I'll read only some of the bullets here, not all of them.
Okay.
Place our agents and helpers everywhere. Take control of the media and use it in propaganda for our plans. Start fights between different races, classes, and religions. Use bribery, threats, and blackmail to get our way. Use Freemasonic lodges to attract potential public officials. Appeal to successful people's egos. Money. Appoint puppet leaders who can be controlled by blackmail. Replace royal rule, in other words, monarchies.
How old is this document? How old is it?
This goes back to, I think it was 1904, 05.
Okay. All right.
So let's just say about 120 years ago.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'm not going to go read through all of this. It's not a very big document, but everything is here. Now, when you read it, you're going to see the game plan unfold right before you, and you're also going to see that a lot of this stuff is already well underway, if not already baked into the cake.
Yeah.
Some things are still an open switch, but it's very important for people to read stuff like this, because when you read the Protocols of Zion and then you get into the Frankfurt School, you quickly realize that they have the exact same ideology.
So they must be working together.
Yeah. So it's
all part of the same thing.
It's a long-term ideology that has been in place for a long time by communists. And communism is a Jewish ideology. A lot of people don't know that either, but it is. So now with the Frankfurt School, they came up with what is referred to as critical theory ideology. So the critical theory divides the masses into two categories: oppressors and victims. So just think about that. Today, what do we have? We have oppressors and victims. That's always the battle. It's always somebody fighting the oppressors or the man. And that goes back to the 1960s.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they always put a hero in the mix that's going to come and save you from the oppressor.
Right. That's right.
I don't know if that's part of it, but it seems like there's always a guy in a white horse. It's always a guy going to come galloping in to save us all from some
Donald
party.
Trump.
Yeah, exactly.
Elon Musk.
Exactly.
Okay. These are the guys that are going to ride in, like you said, Pete, on the white horse.
Yeah.
And they're going to do battle on your behalf. You don't need to do anything. You can tweet all day long. That's fantastic. Continue to tweet.
If you're allowed.
But let Elon and Donald Trump and whoever else, let them take the bad guys on.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And folks, what you have to understand is all of these people, Musk, Trump, they are all part of the controlled system. They're all part of it. The very system that oppresses you is not going to magically become unoppressed and free you. It's just not going to happen. Okay.
No,
so
I completely agree. Yeah.
Their premise is to keep your head in their system. So the political system is a uniparty. It's one system. And they play off of each other as if there's two distinct factions out there. But at the end of the day, they're one and the same with the same goals. And I've tried to explain this to many people, Peter, over the years. We did not get to where we are today with the system because two parties were fighting each other. Two parties were working together with each other behind the scenes to move the ball forward while giving the perception that there are differences.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, our original government back in the 1700s was there weren't parties. I don't think George Washington was a Democrat and Jefferson was a Republican. I don't think they did. I don't think they believed in a party system back then.
Yeah, you might be correct. I'm trying to remember going back. I did some reading about that years ago. But in either case, what we have today, whether they had parties or not back then, today it's just one big club.
Yeah.
And we're not in it. I mean, just take a look at everything that goes on, all the crimes that are committed, and nobody's held accountable.
Oh, exactly.
Nobody's held accountable. So critical theory, which came out of the Frankfurt School, again, divides the masses into two categories, oppressors and victims. And the intent was to destabilize society and to destroy the, quote, oppressive order. So one of the ways they did this was through feminism. So let me give this example. So they want to eliminate the traditional family nucleus because that's in the way of this one world communist state. And so what they did was there was two things. There was a war on the male, and it was also a war on women. And people think, well, a war on women, yes. So going back to the very beginning of time, the traditional family nucleus consisted of the husband or the father, which was the provider and safety, the hunter, and so on, provider. And we had the wife or the mother who would take care of the children and maintain the home. And so there was that synergy.
Yeah.
And it's traditional, and it's not just traditional here in the United States. It goes back through the beginning of time, through all cultures.
Sure.
Now, some people might want to argue that in certain family dynamics, it was somewhat different. That's okay. It's okay if it's somewhat different, as long as the balance is reached and there's an agreement between the man and the woman, the husband, the wife, or whatever, that's how they're going to work it. But the cultural Marxists, the Frankfurt School, were not interested in a balance. They weren't interested in an agreed upon dynamic. So what they did with feminism was they turned around and they went to women. It was a full-fledged propaganda war on women. And they said to them, look, why are you home taking care of the kids?
Yeah.
Why are you doing that? Why are you interested in taking care of the house? Why are you doing that as your husband gallivants off to work and he's making money and he's able to go traveling or whatever, the husband did for a living. So what they did was, this is going back to the Bertrand Russell quote, where they're going to convince people that snow is black. Critical theory basically is gaslighting. It's getting you to believe something, a belief that you have is not a valid belief. Because a lot of women back in the day were saying, well, look, I'm perfectly happy being home, taking care of the household, caring for the children. I'm perfectly satisfied with doing that. So a lot of women were pushing back on this, and they just kept at it and kept at it and kept at it. And that's when they started with women's lib and getting women into the workplace, because as soon as they were able to do that, that allowed the family to begin to disintegrate. Now, the mother was out of the house. The father was out of the house because he was working. That would lead to the children going to preschool care, going to school during the day, after school care. So the children then had limited interaction with their biological parents, essentially almost becoming wards of the state. And so there was now influences on the children where the kids can be conditioned and propagandized with curriculums, whether it be in school or outside of school, to start to shape their minds. And the other thing that they did was, in order to get the women out of the ladies out of the house, was to create an economic and financial situation where it became so expensive to be able to own a home, right? Because back in the day when I was a kid, my mother stayed home. She cared for the children. Dad went to work. And in fact, Dad had basically two jobs. One was like a part-time job, but he had a full-time job and a part-time job. But we had a nice house on Long Island. We were, basically blue-collar, middle class. Sure. And we were able to live that way. But then, as time went on, future generations could not afford to have that type of home on one income.
No.
It couldn't happen. So that's the other thing that they did. So they have multiple levers. They have levers where they're just psychologically, screwing with people's heads and telling you, do you really want to be a mother? Do you really want to, watch kids? Do you really want to go to PTA meetings? Do you really want to do this? Don't you want to be in the workforce? Don't you want to make the same money? And then while they're doing that, they're altering the economic and financial landscape to make it necessary for the woman, in many cases, to have to go to work.
And if you look at the condition of our country, just in the United States, the violence and the kids that are killing each other and shooting up schools, and how it's just had this horrible effect because there's nobody at home now.
Right.
Both parents are working. The kids are losing their minds.
Right.
And you can see where it's headed. They're trying to steer us towards, okay, things are too expensive. Now I have a feeling they're trying to push us towards this socialistic economy where the government takes care of everybody.
Yeah.
And we're all just like, oh, okay, yeah, if you want to give me a couple $1,000 a month, I'll be fine with that. But that was just a thought I had there.
No, that's exactly where they're taking this, Peter. They're taking this to the point where, look, at the end of the day, eugenics did not go away. So depopulation is a very big item on their agenda. We'll talk about that in a little bit, because it's getting to the point where a lot of people are no longer productive in society. They're counterproductive. They're into decadence. They're into inane activities, so they're not contributing to the benefit or the health of society or the culture. They're not contributors.
No.
So, and this is being done by design. And at some point, like I said, we're going to see declines in the population. That's my personal belief. And I think the March 2020 event was a way to kick that off. So critical theory dissects existing societal beliefs and criticizes them in a way to redefine existing beliefs. So existing beliefs, values, and morals, which were imposed by governments, religions, etc., as oppressive, thus inhibiting human potential. So they criticize it, saying that the reason why you believe what you believe and you do what you do is because it's been imposed upon you by governments and religions. It's not because it's inherent to, it's not instinctual to your thinking. It's because somebody told you had to do it that way. Now, that's not to say that there aren't things that we're told have to be a certain way, but it's also not the case that we don't have instinctual feelings and understandings of right and wrong, as an example, of what's the right way to raise a family. And the right way to raise a family is to ensure that we have as much attention at home as we possibly can with the children and the proper education, and to be taught proper etiquette and manners, and for the mother and father to be very good role models. Now, I know that, that's a tall order because everybody's different and everybody has different experiences with their families, myself included. But that's the premise. I mean, that's really what we should be striving for. We should be striving for that. We should be striving for a more intellectual, more philosophical, a society that is based more on going with their instincts, their God-given instincts and reasoning, than all of this crap that's just being funneled through our television sets and dumped into our living rooms and just dumbing everything down. So that's the thing. So again, victims and oppressors. So with critical theory and the Frankfurt School, the oppressors are the government. It's the fascist state. You'll hear the Frankfurt School talk about fascism all the time. Adorno talks about that. He says that at work, people are producers. At home, they are consumers. That's the result of a capitalist fascist state. Now, there's a lot when you look into Theodore Adorno. There's a lot that Adorno says that, I mean, it makes sense. It resonates to a point. But then you have to take a step back and say, okay, well, Adorno said the following things. I'll take you through some of the things that he said.
Okay.
But then you have to lay it up against, okay, he said that. Now, where are we today? So what he was talking about didn't really transpire. It didn't. So was he gaslighting us at the time? Or was he a person that was altruistic in a way? And, let's just say, I'll play devil's advocate, that he didn't have the full understanding of where things were ultimately going down later on down the line, decades down the line. So maybe at his point in time when he was talking about this stuff, he actually believed this stuff and he thought that maybe he could help move humanity in a better direction. Maybe. Okay. So I don't want people to go all nuts thinking I'm defending the Frankfurt School or Theodore Adorno. I'm just saying that, I wasn't there. I wasn't in the man's head. All I could do is read the things that he said, and I could build a case to say that maybe that's where he was at. Although I could also make a case that says now 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the line, the stuff he was talking about really didn't transpire.
So he was part of the Frankfurt School.
Yes.
Okay.
Adorno was part of the Frankfurt School with Max Horkheimer, who I read that quote before, another guy by the name of Herbert Marcuse, and also Eric Fromm. We'll talk a little bit about Adorno in just a moment here. So the Frankfurt School recommended the creation of racial divides, continual change to create confusion, and we see this all the time. So going back to something as simple as masks work, masks don't work. Masks work, masks don't work. This was the Fauci bit. Yeah. Right? Going back and forth. This is creating confusion. Yeah. Teaching sex and alternative sexual lifestyles to children. We see that in spades today. Undermining the authority of the schools and the teachers, promoting excessive drinking and drugs, emptying the churches. Again, this is the war on Christianity. In Memoirs, it tells us that the Illuminati or the controllers declared war on Christianity on September 11th of 1962. That's when they formally put the stake in the ground and they said, okay, we're going to dismantle Christianity. The Frankfurt School advocated creating an unreliable legal system with victim bias, dependency on the state, controlling the media to dumb down, and encouraging the breakdown of the family. They promoted pansexualism, and this goes back to the cult of Pan. And when we talk about promoting pansexualism, we're talking about the search for pleasure and overthrowing traditional relationships, going back and breaking down the family and the traditional relationship between a man and a woman and their children. They also were advocates of marginalizing the role of the father. So they wanted to abolish male, quote, dominance because men oppress women. That's their propaganda. Men oppress women. And so therefore, again, we're going back to the oppressor victim.
Yes.
Right? Discussion.
Yeah.
They advocated removing the parents as the primary educators. We talked about that.
Mm-hmm.
And obfuscate the difference between genders. In fact, there's a quote by Erich Fromm, who was one of the members of the Frankfurt School, and he said he was an active advocate of the matriarchal theory, and he was quoted as saying that masculinity and femininity, he claimed they were not reflections of, quote, essential sexual differences. So masculinity and femininity were not reflections of essential sexual differences, as the Romantics had thought, but were derived instead from differences in life functions, which were in part socially determined. Okay, again, so we're back to snow is black.
Mm-hmm.
This type of thinking. They also said that the use of music can be used to promote mental illness and destroy society.
Yeah.
Verses or lyrics that were set to music and repeatedly intoned are very effective. So lyrics that were repeated over and over and over again was a form of hypnosis. It was a form of indoctrination and brainwashing. Adorno had said that they could promote a culture of pessimism and despair via radio and television. And this is something that we see all the time. Anybody who sits down and watches the cable news networks like CNBC, and MSNBC, Fox News, CNN, and so on, nothing ever positive comes out of that screen, ever. Everything is pessimistic. Everything is violence and war and upheaval. It's done to create stress and anxiety and worries in your life.
Now, about Adorno, you've touched on him a little bit here, but in his studies, his published studies, on the surface, he claims he was anti-pop culture.
Yeah.
He was an avant-garde musician that wrote atonal music, not pop music.
Right.
So they portray him on the surface as being against all this stuff.
Right.
When in fact, I think he used this is my theory, he used this stuff in conjunction with the Frankfurt School and Tavistock to alter society.
Yes.
Because he was aware of the psychological implications of music and all the things you just mentioned.
Right. So what he did was, because that question comes up a lot. People will say, well, Adorno was not a fan of pop music or jazz. What he did, though, was he leveraged that music to push forward the Frankfurt School's cultural Marxist agenda, this, quote, egalitarian end state that Max Horkheimer was quoted as talking about. So if we take the Beatles as an example, so the Beatles started off very pop oriented, right? They're beginning their early songs going back to Please Please Me and With the Beatles, pretty much straightforward rock and roll. But if we take a look at the evolution of their music from Please Please Me, which was released in March of 1963, up through, let's just pick Revolver, their seventh album, and we take a look at how the music moved and changed in sophistication, that, in my opinion, that is the direct influence of Theodor Adorno shaping the music to move it into a certain direction so that it will support the cultural revolution. So it would support the counterculture.
And it moved into more of an atonal, a lot of Lennon's and Harrison's too, moved into more of an avant-garde genre and very strange and out of the out of left field type of music.
Right.
Whereas Paul and Ringo, well, Ringo's not really a factor altogether, but Paul's was still his progression got more orchestrated and elaborate.
Right. Right. And if we go to like Revolution number 9, when you think about that, that's avant-garde atonal in a way. That's a collage of stuff.
Yeah.
Right. And then you got Lennon in his solo career with Yoko Ono and the avant-garde, and really again atonal types of. It's in that realm of atonal. It's not tonal. It doesn't have a core. It's all over the place. So, folks, if you're not familiar with atonal music, a best example would be listen to an old horror movie where the piano was just all over the place. I'm just,
Yeah.
Right. That's a good example of atonal music.
If you want a good example of making everybody think things are black, Yoko Ono's music and John Lennon's Yoko Ono's music, for the life of me, they've been trying to convince me,
right,
since I was a child, that her screaming into a microphone that is where it's at when it comes to avant-garde. And
right.
And I'm like, there is no way you can ever convince me that a woman screaming to a microphone is music. But they've desperately tried to tell us that music like that is music. Right. I think that's just an example to pull the Beatle crowd in. That's
a perfect
atonal.
example. It's a perfect example, and it was even Lennon was advocating that, pushing how brilliant she was and that she was ahead of her time, and very few people really understood Yoko Ono's genius. It's the same thing, Pete, with the CIA created modern art. They knew that modern art was just a bunch of nonsense. So if we just put a canvas up and somebody throws 3 dots of red paint on it,
yeah,
right, and you're told that that's brilliant. And people would look at it and stare at it in museums and go, just those 3 dots, or just, I don't know how he did it. Well,
yeah.
That was the CIA. That was another psychological operation to get people to think irrationally, because a rational person would look at a white canvas with 3 dots and say, "Are you kidding me? That's a white canvas with 3 drops of paint on it. I'm moving on. I'm going down to to the diner to get a sandwich."
Yeah.
But it got people into this mindset where they were accepting irrational, illogical situations and presentations and embracing them.
Well,
so Adorno, when you think about what Adorno, and I do believe Adorno was he was in a position, a very, very influential position with the Beatles music, working with George Martin. I think if I had to say the way I think the organizational structure worked, I think George Martin reported in to Theodore Adorno. That's how I think it worked. That's that's just my opinion. And so when we think about what we were talking about before, the progression of the Beatles music, starting with Please Please Me and with the Beatles, very basic stuff, and then you start getting into Help and then Revolver. In fact, with Revolver, the take on that was, now the Beatles are moving more into music that doesn't make you move, it makes you think. It's thinking person's music. And then, of course, we get into that's Rubber Soul. I think I said Rubber Soul, I hope. Then we get into Revolver. And then from Revolver, of course, we get into Sgt. Pepper. But that was all table setting. And Sgt. Pepper, of course, kicked off the psychedelic era, and drugs, free love. And anytime there's a discussion about the Beatles, a documentary, and I know you can attest to this, they will almost always talk about how influential the Beatles were to culture change.
Oh, absolutely.
So it was everything. It was the music. It was the way they dressed. It was even the way they spoke. And Tavistock creates all of these genres, Pete, as you know. And even if bands were not in on the PSYOP per se, in other words, bands were signed or recruited, the thing is they operated within that genre's parameters. So in other words, let's just say classic rock as an example. So they would come in and they play within that genre of music, classic rock or the British invasion.
Mm-hmm.
It's a process of emulation. So they didn't actually have to be schooled in what the end game goal is of the New World Order or the control system, the One World Order. A lot of these bands, they were put in a position where they emulated the style of music. They emulated the lyrics. They emulated the singing. They emulated the way the music was presented, whether it be the way they dressed or the way the album covers were reflective of occult symbolism and stuff like that. Because I get that question a lot too. People will say, well, every single band was, signed on a dotted line on this thing. I said, no, not every single band. There were key instrumental bands that were leading the way. And yes, they were in on it. But
you have to understand, like most people don't know, when you get signed to a label, the label takes over and tells you how to dress.
Yes.
They tell you what songs are going to be in the album. They tell you what key they're going to be in. I think the big producers who are run by something else manipulate the sound to make it more.
That's absolutely right. So
yeah,
the labels are all tied into the music and entertainment industry. It's all controlled. Yeah. And the music and entertainment industry is controlled from cradle to grave, from beginning to end. So if you're going to be in that system one way or another, you are going to lose your voice. You are going to lose a level of your creativity and your vote or your voice in what goes on. Because at the end of the day, they're going to present it this way. Look, this is a business. It's our business. And we're going to tell you how you've got to put this together, because whether you like to hear it or not, Mr. or Mrs. Band or artist, you are a product. And so, so a lot of these entertainers and these musicians and these bands, they go from this whole well, we're musicians and we're all about creativity, to being told directly or indirectly by the music industry, by the labels, you're a product. Mm-hmm. It's as simple as that. And at the drop of a hat, they will bring in whoever they need to bring in, musician-wise, to record on the track. So if you're the guitar player in a band and you put a guitar track down, the producer sits down and says, "Yeah, I don't think so. I've got a guy that I want to lay down that guitar track because he or she's a much better guitar player, or I've worked with them before." Maybe it's just a matter of I've worked with them before. And there's even, it's interesting because there are even people who have YouTube channels who are in, music YouTube channels, and they're producers. Oh, yeah. I'm not going to say who they are.
Yeah, I know some of them. Yeah.
Yeah. And even I watch their shows, because I love the musical aspect of it as a musician.
Sure. Yeah.
But even they have said that they have brought people in to re-record tracks. They've hired other musicians. They've hired songwriters to write music for a particular band so that they can create content for their albums or whatever it is they're going to release. So boy, we really got off on a tangent there, or I did.
Sorry.
But that's okay. But what Adorno did was Adorno used the Beatles. He leveraged them, right? So he leveraged the existing system, if you will, the existing pop music. And it was very ingenious. Him and George Martin, what they did was very genius. They continued to evolve it over time until it got to the point where it was extremely effective in changing societal norms, in creating culture change.
Let me stop you. So how did, let's say Martin reported to Adorno. Initially, Martin didn't like the Beatles. He didn't like their music. Right. He thought they were crap.
Rubbish.
So they decided somehow they blackmailed Martin or did something, got him to, but how did they know this was going to work and become the phenomenon that it became? That's where did they see something in these guys and their sound?
No,
or did they
I think
make the sound.
The decision was made several notches up the chain. So I think George Martin started working with EMI Parlophone in 1955. And by the time he was 29 years old, he was handed the label to run the Parlophone label. Parlophone is a part of EMI. And initially, I'm not convinced that George Martin was brought into the loop as to what the Beatles were going to be used for initially. Because the way it works, Pete, it's all compartmentalized. It's a need to know basis.
Mm-hmm.
So there are people that were developing all of this above George Martin that were formulating how they were going to make major changes in society through music. So,
So the Beatles, who went, well, it couldn't have been the initial four, but the band may have been handpicked even when they were kids, right?
Yeah.
When they were first musicians, said, hey, these four guys, they come from this background. Lennon's perfect to manipulate his mind because he's had trauma. Paul had trauma. He lost his mother to breast cancer. I think they looked for broken people. Ringo had been hospitalized as a kid. He was kind of shattered by his childhood being so sick. Could it be they looked for people that were very susceptible to a suggestion?
Yeah, yes, and families that are somehow connected into the system.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so now, interestingly enough, if you go on the internet and you try to find a lot of information on Paul McCartney, or biological Paul McCartney's father, Jim McCartney, you're not going to find a lot.
Mm-mm.
Which is very strange because here we have the father of arguably one of the most famous musicians of all time.
Yeah.
And there's essentially very little on Jim McCartney.
No.
Now, in memoirs, it tells us that Jim McCartney was steering his son away from Christianity. So that's a little hint there that something was going on. Now, I'll get back to this in a second here.
Okay.
But you're on a good point, especially like with Lennon. Lennon had a lot of trauma. He lost his mother, who was raised by his Aunt Mimi. His father, Freddie, was nowhere to be found. A lot of people also don't realize that John Lennon really had a dislike for Christianity early on in his life.
Mm-hmm.
There's some stories in the book, The Lennon Prophecy. It's a book I read. The author's name is Joseph Niezgoda. And some of the stories that Joseph relays in his book are actually quite disturbing as far as Lennon's dislike for Christianity. We also have these, and I've mentioned this on a number of shows, we have these images of the Beatles, primarily Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and John Lennon, associated with bird cages. Now, birdcage symbolism in Illuminati speak refers to mind control subjects. So I have images where Paul McCartney and George Harrison have the bird cages on their heads.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have another image of John Lennon in a Superman shirt leaning up against the side of a bird cage. Now, the Superman shirt is interesting because that goes back to Crowley and that goes back to Nietzsche. And it's referred to as the Übermensch, the superhuman. And this is something else that the controllers are very much into, the development of the superhuman, the transcendent human. And
Superman was written here in Cleveland by two Jewish men.
Yes.
And it's basically a Jewish story of, I can't remember the exact story, but it's nothing about Krypton and all that stuff. It's about Moses or something. It's a lot of Jewish symbolism in Superman that they don't talk about, but I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay. So we have to, so when I see this type of symbolism, what comes to mind is that the Beatles, in all likelihood, going back to your point, they were in, it's possible they were in some kind of program early on in their lives, mm-hmm. and that they were being handled and groomed. Of course, now when you're a young kid, you're unaware of this stuff, but you are being handled and you are being groomed and you are having experiences and you are doing things which culminate to a certain point in your life when the switch is thrown and you're brought in for the next phase or the next stage of what's going to go on. And so I believe there was a whole phase with the Beatles being groomed and handled prior to going to Hamburg. And once they got to Hamburg, that was another phase or another stage of their grooming and their handling. I mean, when we think about, they connected with Stuart Sutcliffe, right? We're told, had a relationship with Astrid Kircher, the photographer. Well, she connects up with the Beatles. I think it was in late 1960s. And she starts taking all of these artsy photos of the Beatles. But back during that time period, when the Beatles hit Hamburg back in August of 1960, they were a non-entity. They were not good musicians. They weren't writing songs. So I see this again as table setting. This is the type of thing that takes place where certain people are introduced into the equation in order to create the backstory. Right? It's the same thing with Klaus Vormann.
Yes.
Okay. And if we take if you want to pick on another band, Tom Petty. I remember watching a documentary on Tom Petty when Petty was nobody. There was still all of this footage, video footage, film footage of him when he was not on anybody's radar. So who was like, why is somebody following him around?
Yeah.
Filming him when, the chances that he was going to become famous is like anybody else. I mean, it's a million to one shot, right? I mean, I'm talking about from a public perspective. Of course, if he's on somebody's radar, it's not a million to one. Yeah. So you have to start asking yourselves that question. Gordon Lightfoot was another one. I remember watching a documentary on Gordon Lightfoot, and when he was up in Canada and he was doing his shows in these bars and doing his gigs, there was all of this film footage of him, Peter, and really artsy types of footage where they're shooting from the ground up.
Oh, really?
Certain angles. And, I was watching this with my wife, and the question we asked ourselves is, who's filming this, and why are they filming this? So this is the type of stuff that we see, and it's difficult for a lot of people to get their heads wrapped around because people just can't think in terms of that much planning that far in advance. But there is that much planning that far in advance. And like I said, because many times the families of these people are somehow or usually tied in to the system, into the military, as an example, into intelligence.
Exactly.
So anyway, boy, oh boy, I really took us off on a little ride there.
I took you off the trail okay. You're on.
So anyway, I think going back to what you were saying about Adorno, he wasn't a fan of pop music and all that stuff, but he was leveraging it. He was leveraging it in order to be able to push the agenda forward. He was not going to be able to push the agenda forward by coming out with atonal music and then trying to get people to enjoy it, like it, play it, buy it. That was never going to happen. Atonal music is very, very difficult, in my opinion, to enjoy. It's very, it has a lot of tension, a lot of stress. It doesn't have moments of release. And so it's not anything enjoyable to listen to. So what he did was he leveraged the existing system to push the ball forward. Now, Frankfurt's network extends into eugenics. I talked about the Fabians before, population control, sexual and family law reforms. It's linked to publishing houses, medical and educational and research establishments, women's organizations, marriage counseling, governments, etc. So the Frankfurt School, like Tavistock, are embedded within the very fabric of our institutions within society. And the Frankfurt School and Tavistock are connected at the hip, as well as Tavistock was also a highly financed, still is to this day, by the Rockefellers. And the CIA is one of Tavistock's largest clients.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yes. So again, folks, these books, Coleman's book on Tavistock, he goes through a lot of this, and Daniel Eschulin's book. I can only do so much as far as taking you through this stuff, but yeah. So that's the deal with Theodore Adorno. I've struggled with Adorno a little bit, Peter, because, like I said, was there this piece of him that there was an altruistic aspect of him where he actually thought that he was going to somehow achieve the goals of the human potential movement of the 1960s with Willis Harman, who was was a peer of Theodore Adorno's, and Willis Harman was behind the human potential movement and the Aquarian conspiracy. The Aquarian conspiracy was what was behind the counterculture of the 1960s. So I don't know, but it certainly didn't work out that way. And so when we go from the Frankfurt School, and another connection point leading into the Beatles, I mentioned earlier, was the Beat movement. So the Beat movement were cultural Marxists as well. And three primary players, there were more, but there was William S. Burroughs, who is on the cover of Sgt. Pepper, Allen Ginsberg, and Jack Kerouac. And the members of the Beat generation developed a reputation as new bohemian hedonists who celebrated nonconformity and spontaneous creativity. Now, the spontaneous creativity goes back to the cult of Pan. So all mixed up in this cultural Marxism, Pete, is the cult of Pan and the cult of Dionysus. Basically, do as thou wilt. If it feels good, do it. And we have the Nike tagline, just do it. So it all goes back to that as well. And elements of the Beat movement were incorporated into the hippie and larger counterculture movements. And the Beats had a pervasive influence on rock and roll and popular music, including the Beatles, Bob Dylan, and Jim Morrison. The Beatles spelled their name with an A, partly as a Beat generation reference.
I never
Yes.
connected that. Okay.
Yep, goes back to the Beats. Also, the beetle goes back to the scarab beetle of Egyptian mythology, because the Egyptian scarab beetle is associated with enlightenment. And John Lennon was a fan of Jack Kerouac. And as I mentioned, the Beatles put William S. Burroughs on the cover of the Sgt. Pepper album.
Mm-hmm.
So, of course, that again led us into the Beatles. And the Beatles were really the first manufactured band to come out with a full-fledged mission of social engineering. They were the bedrock, and other genres were built upon the Beatles. Even genres which people think are completely unrelated. The Beatles are the foundation of the house. So your roof may not look like your basement, but without that basement, you wouldn't have the roof.
It's all connected.
It's all connected. Yes.
Well, I think what I've always wondered is I said when we first met, is why did the Beatles have such an influence on me? How did they take me by the throat as an 8-year-old kid, and I couldn't look away? And, I wondered if there's anything in the music, especially newer music, where there's some type of hidden tone, like a hertz or something that makes it hypnotic, because I listened to Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young's album. They're one of their first albums. And I, as a grown man, I can't listen to it, because every time I hear it, I go into like I'm high. Like I'm just like, whoa. And I go, this is not right. Why would this music do this to me? And I've always wondered, what is it about this genre that took young people's mind like mine and just totally threw me? I mean, I was off in the woods until I was in my 30s, obsessed with the Beatles. I mean, if you met any of my family or friends from that era, they would tell you I was a lunatic for the Beatles, and I would get into fights with people that they were the best band. And do you know of anything that's in the music itself that they've put into any, not just their music, that is hypnotic in such a way? Since you've done hypnosis, is there any way to break the tracks apart or hear a tone that's buried in the mix that is like a dog whistle? I know that's on Sergeant Pepper's, but
Yeah, I don't know about I don't know of a way to identify which frequencies have been put into the music to elicit some kind of response. Now, Alan Watt, the musician and the truth seeker, not the other Alan Watt.
okay, yeah.
I had Alan. I had a quote of his. He was actually not a quote, but it was an interview. And at the end of my follow-up to my big presentation, did the Beatles write all their own music? I did a follow-up titled The Addendum. At the very end, I had an interview. It was about 5 or 6 minutes of Alan. He explained, now I don't know how Alan knew this, but he said that George Martin was an expert in incorporating sound frequency into music.
Seriously?
Yes.
You just, I just was pulling that out of my backside. So,
No,
I'm onto something.
Yeah, you're onto something. So
okay,
he talked about this, and like I said, I don't know how Alan knows this. So this tells us, if Alan is correct, and I suspect he probably is, this tells us what I've always suspected, that George Martin was more than just a producer. He was, in my view, a social engineer, a social scientist, working with Theodore Adorno, perhaps even working with, like I mentioned before, Willis Harman, who was behind the human potential movement. And you'll read about Willis Harman in the memoirs of Billy Shears. He gets notable mention a couple of times in the book.
Okay.
So I think all of these guys, Pete, they were all on the same page, and they were all working for the same company with the exact same objectives. And the way the Masonic system works is it's a pyramid structure. It's like a big corporation. Think of it as Masonic Incorporated or Freemasonry Incorporated. And
you have a chart there of that, don't you?
I have a chart. I have a chart that I don't have it up here with me right now, but
okay.
A person by the name of Dylan Monroe, I stumbled upon this going back about 2 months ago, and he put together a pyramid of power. It's a hierarchy, and he did a phenomenal job of there's 5 tiers and placing who's where in that tier, everywhere from the mass population at the very bottom of the pyramid, up through the corporations, up through the international structures like the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, and all that stuff, up through the secret societies like the Freemasons, going up into the Vatican. And by the way, he shows that Aleister Crowley's religion of Thelema, which is Luciferianism, which is the cult of Pan, is very high up that pyramid, as I had surmised by doing my own research. So I was very happy to see that I don't know Dylan at all. I just happened to come across his work when he placed Thelema that high up into the 3rd tier of the pyramid. I said, well, there you go, So, so this pyramid, the way it works is, like I said, it's just like a corporation. Whenever there's a project or there's an initiative or there's some kind of an agenda that needs to get done, they tap their resources, their network, for the best skilled people to pull together whatever it is they're looking to do. And that's what I think happened with George Martin. So I think initially George was not brought into the fold because at that point, there was not a need to know. But the Beatles, unbeknownst to him, were being brought along by levels above him. And so when it was time to bring the Beatles in under his wing, that's when he was told, you're going to take them on. And not only are you going to take them on, but you're going to be instrumental in creating what they became. Because without George Martin, the Beatles, they were going nowhere fast. And I've covered this on so many shows without getting into it. Yeah, you know.
Well, I think the thing that makes it seem like they were manufactured is because when you hear the early recordings in Hamburg, the crowd is like, "Oh yeah, great," but I'm supposed to believe that was just an off night.
No.
But come on, I mean they were average at best, doing shimmy shimmy shake and all that stuff. I'm just like, that has to be there. Somebody had to go, I don't care what they look like now, we're going to make them into something.
Yes.
It just seems like they were plucked out of, there's no way of all the bands that were in Hamburg and in Liverpool and England that they just happened to get lucky. It just doesn't seem possible.
Yeah. And we have to keep in mind that the Beatles went to Hamburg in August of 1960, and they were known as a bum group. And this is explained by their manager at the time, their handler, Alan Williams, in The Complete Beatles from the 1980 documentary, which was considered the Beatles documentary until Anthology was released. And so from August through December of 1960, the Beatles basically banged around Hamburg. It was the red light district. There was lots of booze. There was lots of drugs. There was lots of prostitution. In fact, again, the book Lenin Prophecy, Joseph Niezgoda goes into this. The Beatles were treated for sexually transmitted diseases, STDs. And they left Hamburg in December of 1960 completely dejected because nothing happened. Nothing happened.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And it didn't pick up until 1961. And you and I talked about this on our first show, when, all of a sudden they start getting all of these gigs and they're getting booked left and right, whether it be back in Hamburg or back home in Liverpool and adjacent areas. And this is a band that really had phenomenal skills musically.
Yeah, exactly.
And no songwriting ability, Pete. I have a quote from George Martin where he said that it was not evident. It was not obvious.
Yeah.
That they were songwriters. So, there's so much with the Beatles story. There's so much that the thing is, but when you talk about this, you're one of the very small percentage of people that actually are objective and have an open mind to this stuff. So many people just absolutely shut it down because, like I said earlier, what does Tavistock create? It creates cults, and nobody wants their cult belief system to be questioned. Nobody.
Oh, I know.
Nobody. And it's a shame too, because I try to explain to folks, it's okay to question it. Your life will be okay afterward. It really will be.
Well, I think the thing with me is I started thinking about some of the music of theirs when I was a kid that I didn't like I've told you, Love Me Do. That song, if it dropped off the face of the earth, the world would be a better place. But when I was little, I talked myself into going, yeah, I love this song. And even songs I couldn't stand, like Tomorrow Never Knows and Number 9, I eventually was like, oh, this is amazing.
Yeah.
I'm like, wait a minute, what happened? And it's like cigarettes or booze. When you have your first beer, my first beer tastes like crap. And I didn't want to drink it again, but I could laugh and be more lighthearted and hit on girls. It's just like you talk yourself into liking garbage.
Yes.
And I don't know if that's all part of the process, but I also noticed that I've got a 2019 Subaru Forester. Every time I turn on the ignition, the radio comes on. I'm like, why? Why does the radio have to come on to the last song, last station I listened to? And I thought, and then we were at a mall over on the east side of Cleveland, and everywhere you went in this mall, there was music outside, and it's an outdoor mall. There's speakers on the sidewalk. You hear classic rock all over the place. You go in the stores, classic rock all over the place. Like, why are we constantly awash in music in this culture, and CNN and Fox and the airports? And I started to question all this. I'm like, well, wait a minute. Why do we constantly have to be barraged with music and messages? And we're now walking. Well, this isn't a billboard. You've got your Gretsch hat on. No offense to you and Gretsch, but we're walking billboards. They've
Yeah.
got us promoting their agenda with logos, the Nike logo or Reebok or whoever it is. And I was like, what? Nobody else notices it. Everyone else, so what? Your radio turns on when you turn on the car. Just turn it off. But that's not the point. There's a reason why they do that. It's
Why
not
is
just,
it doing right? That's
yeah,
right.
I don't think it's by coincidence or convenience. So
People have to stop thinking in terms of coincidence
Yeah.
all the time.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there are coincidences. I mean, there's no question. But the thing is, it's about pattern recognition, and we do have to take a step back and take a look at where the world is at. And you have to ask yourself the question: be honest with yourself, be objective, and say, do you like what you see? Does this seem normal to you? And it's, I'll answer from my perspective. No, it is not normal. There's a tremendous amount of dysfunction and decadence, and it's completely upside down. The entire political system is a clown show.
Oh, yeah. It's really bad.
It's really bad, and people are still playing in it. People are still cheering it on and believing in it. And I don't know. People who are critical thinkers, people who could think clearly, they're a very small percentage of the population. And a lot of times we sound like lone wolves, howling at night.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Nobody wants to hear when we say, hey, I don't know about that guy or whatever. People don't want to hear it. People love to worship. They love to follow. They want to have their heroes.
Yeah.
That's what they want. That's what they want.
And I've got a podcast on Mind Revolution where I say, be your own hero, because no one's coming to save you.
No.
Donald Trump is not going to save us or keep illegals out. I mean, he didn't do it the first time. Why does anybody think he's going to do it this time? I just don't understand. I hate to pick on my wife, but she watches these reality TV shows. And they come on, and I tell her, I say, there's a whole camera crew that these women, do you ever watch New Jersey Housewives or any of those horrible shows? It's just these really horribly done up women with plastic implants and boobs hanging out. And they bitch and scream at each other and cry and get drunk and all this stuff. And I said to Meg, I said, there's a whole camera crew behind the scene here. This is not reality. There's grips and gaffs and cameramen and producers and sound techs. There's no way it's spontaneous. And if they don't do it right the first time, they say, cut. Okay, Gene, say that, call that girl a prostitution whore with more intensity. All right, let's do it again. And she's like, yeah, I know that, but I just like watching it. And when you watch her watch it, it's like she becomes a child.
Yes.
I watch, she goes into this little world, and I just sit and watch her. I just horrified at, how she's so bedazzled by these TV shows, and her mother watches them too.
Remember what I told you, that one of their tactics is to reduce adult thinking to a childlike state.
Yeah. I mentioned that when we did the last interview about all the cartoon animals they use to entertain us with insurance companies and things like that.
And we talked about the Beatles Now and Then video, which looked like it was, it was like a Sesame Street episode. It was all this silly, goofy stuff. And if you watch the comments or you read the comments under that video, it's amazing. You have adults just fawning over this stuff and reacting like children and writing out childlike comments. It's just absurd.
Yeah, they're in tears. They're choked up. They're verklempt because they've got, and I used to be I still get like that over some music. Yeah. But more of my stuff is with Clapton and his blues solos that really move me. But that's a whole nother thing. But this has been great. I don't know if I got you off track because I kept asking questions.
No, I think we covered just about everything. We got there.
Thanks, everybody, for watching. That was Mike Williams talking about Theodore Adorno, Tavistock, and their connection with the Beatles. I hope you liked this video. Thanks a lot, Mike, for being on the show. It was a great pleasure working with you. And If you like this video, give it the thumbs up, subscribe, share it. The greatest way you can support this channel for free is just to like and subscribe. Thanks a lot for watching. I'm P.T. Pop on a Mind Revolution. Signing off. Auf Wiedersehen, baby.
Would you like fries with that? Would you like fries with that?